The night is quiet, and the world around you begins to soften into stillness. You have found a place of comfort where the worries of the day can gently fade, and your mind can rest in the rhythm of a story. Tonight, we are not rushing through history or unraveling facts with the harsh light of day. Instead, we are taking a slower path, one that invites you to relax and drift into the misty landscapes of myth. Our journey leads us into the Celtic world, where forests whisper and waters shimmer, and where strange and haunting creatures once wandered through the imagination of generations long past. You may let your eyes grow heavy if they wish, for this story does not demand your full wakefulness. It simply asks that you listen and allow yourself to drift, whether into thought or into dreams. The Celts lived in lands where mist clung to the valleys and seas stretched endlessly beyond the horizon. To them, the world was never only what the eye could see. It was alive with hidden forces, with powers that spoke through wind, through earth, and through the strange cries of animals at night. In such a world, the line between the real and the unreal was delicate and shifting. It is within this twilight place, neither fully dark nor fully light, that the most terrifying monsters of their imagination were born. These monsters were not simply made to frighten. They were symbols of nature's dangers, of human fears, and of mysteries too deep for words. As you listen, I invite you to let each image form slowly, like a picture painted in soft strokes. Imagine a dimly lit hearth where long ago a family might gather at night, listening to a bard speak of creatures in hushed tones. Imagine the flicker of firelight catching the faces of children who sat wide-eyed, not certain whether the stories were warnings or wonders. The same stories that once made them shiver will reach you now in calmer form, spoken with the intention of soothing rather than startling. The creatures we will meet are strange, sometimes sorrowful, and often powerful. Yet as you drift with me through their tales, they will remain safe, held in the soft cradle of storytelling. The Celts believed in layers of existence, where humans shared space with spirits, gods, and beings not quite either. This created a world filled with possibilities, where a shadow across the lake might not be only a shadow, and the call of a bird might not be entirely of this world. From these beliefs came beings that took shape as monsters, but also as guides, warnings, and guardians. Their stories reflected deep respect for the elements, the water that could give life or take it away, the earth that could feed or bury, the sky that could protect with sun or strike with storm. To walk in the Celtic lands was to walk among forces that were never fully understood, and the monsters we will soon meet are born from this sense of awe. You may find as you listen that these creatures carry a strange beauty. Though called monsters, they are not merely grotesque figures to recoil from. They are echoes of the land itself. Some live in rivers or lakes, dark and cold, reminding us of how water can appear calm on the surface yet hide great depths. Some wander in lonely fields, their cries carried on the wind, whispering reminders of the fragile thread between life and death. Some take forms of animals, shifting and changing, reminding us of the wildness that humans can never truly tame. Others move among the dead, walking the thin line between worlds, reminding us that every life is part of a greater cycle. As this story unfolds, we will not rush through battles or roar through storms. Instead, we will travel at a gentler pace, pausing often to notice the silence, the stillness, and the way imagination creates shapes in the dark. Every culture has its monsters, but the Celtic ones are unique in the way they blur fear with fascination. They invite us to look closely at what we fear and find meaning in it. Some, like the water horse known as the kelpie, remind us to respect the power of lakes and rivers. Others, like the wailing banshee, remind us that death is not an end but a passage. Each creature we meet holds a story that can be unsettling, but when told in this way, their presence becomes part of a soothing rhythm, like the rise and fall of breath. Tonight, these monsters will not leap at us from shadows, nor will they cry with sharp voices meant to alarm. Instead, they will be spoken of in soft tones, their terrors turned into gentle echoes. The Celts themselves believed that to speak of such beings was a way of keeping balance with them, of acknowledging their place in the world. By hearing their tales, we too honor that balance, and in doing so, we can drift safely through their realms. So, let your body sink deeper into rest as the journey begins. Imagine mist curling through the trees, the hush of night air moving across a quiet field, and the soft lapping of waves against a shore. These are the landscapes where the Celtic imagination was born. These are the places where monsters took shape, not as enemies to fight, but as mysteries to respect. With each step of the story, we move deeper into their world, where the boundaries between waking and dreaming blur. And as we begin, remember, this is not a tale to trouble your sleep, but a tale to carry you gently into it. The Celtic world is often remembered through fragments of poetry, scraps of legend, and the ruins of ancient settlements scattered across hills and valleys. To enter that world in your imagination is to step into a place where nature itself seemed alive with mystery. Imagine, if you will, a land where rolling green fields stretch into the horizon, divided by stone walls that have stood for centuries. The air is damp and cool, and low clouds drift across the sky, wrapping the mountains in a veil of gray. Forests grow thick and deep, their roots tangled like threads of old stories, their branches creaking in the wind like voices just on the edge of understanding. The sea, vast and restless, beats against cliffs, sending up sprays of salt that hang in the air like mist. This was the landscape that shaped Celtic imagination, a land that breathed and whispered and gave birth to creatures of myth. For the Celts, nature was never only a backdrop. It was alive, filled with spirits, powers, and presences that could not always be seen but were always felt. The river flowing through a valley was not simply water. It might be a goddess or a guardian. The mountain rising above a village was not merely rock and soil. It was a dwelling place of beings older than human memory. The forest was a threshold, a liminal space where one might wander in as a person and emerge as something changed, touched by powers beyond comprehension. In such a world, monsters and gods did not seem far away. They were part of the same breath of life that moved through every tree, every stone, and every gust of wind. The Celts lived close to the land, and the cycles of their lives were tied to the rhythms of nature. Harvest and hunger, sunlight and storm, growth and decay, all were constant reminders of forces greater than themselves. When storms lashed the coast, when crops withered in the fields, or when shadows lengthened in the forest, these were not random events. They were signs, messages, perhaps even warnings from beings that existed just beyond the human eye. Monsters, then, were not simply inventions to entertain or frighten. They were embodiments of the natural world's power, figures that carried meaning and demanded respect. To imagine this world more fully, picture walking through a mist-covered glen at twilight. The air is cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and moss. The sound of a stream trickles nearby, soft yet insistent, as if whispering secrets. In the distance, a bird calls, its cry echoing strangely across the stillness. Every shadow seems deeper, every rustle in the undergrowth louder, as if the land itself is awake and watching. For the Celts, this was not a place of emptiness but of presence. To walk through such a glen was to step into a space where anything might appear, a god in disguise, a fairy host passing through, or a monstrous shape rising from the earth or water. The geography of Celtic lands gave rise to many of these beliefs. The coasts of Ireland and Scotland, with their jagged cliffs and hidden coves, suggested realms beneath the waves where sea monsters and shape-shifting beings might dwell. The highlands and mountains, often cloaked in mists, seemed like entrances to otherworldly domains. Lakes and bogs, dark and bottomless, invited stories of creatures waiting to pull the unwary below. Even the sky was alive with meaning, where storms could be seen as the work of divine forces, and the flight of birds might carry omens. Every feature of the land became a stage for imagination, and monsters were the actors who walked upon it. Yet the Celts did not see their monsters only as foes. They were part of a larger tapestry, woven into the understanding of life and death, of danger and survival. A creature that lived in a lake might be terrifying, but it was also a reminder of the water's sacredness, of its power to give life and to take it. A being that haunted the night might cause fear, but it also reminded people of their own mortality, urging them to live wisely. The stories carried warnings, but they also carried meaning, helping communities navigate the uncertainties of their world. Imagine, too, the way these stories would have been shared. A village gathered by the fire, the day's work completed, the sky outside growing darker. Children pressed close to their elders, their eyes wide as they listened to tales of creatures lurking in the waters or spirits drifting through the air. The storyteller's voice rose and fell like waves, weaving fear and wonder together in a rhythm as steady as breath. Outside, the wind rattled at the doors, and perhaps, for a moment, it was easy to believe that something unseen pressed against the darkness, listening in on the story. These moments of shared imagination connected people not only to one another, but to the land around them. The monsters were not only tales, they were companions to human life, always near, always watching. The Celts also believed in the otherworld, a realm just beyond the reach of ordinary sight. Sometimes it was described as a paradise of eternal youth and abundance, and at other times, as a place of shadows and spirits. The boundary between the human world and the otherworld was thin, and it could be crossed in unexpected ways. A sudden mist might open a path. A cave or a pool of water might serve as a doorway. Those who entered might meet gods or monsters, or be changed forever. This belief in a world layered with unseen dimensions gave even greater depth to their creatures of legend. Monsters were not simply things of nightmares. They were inhabitants of this neighboring realm, crossing over to remind humans of their fragile place in the order of existence. As you let these images settle in your mind, you may notice how the Celtic world begins to take shape not just as a land of hills and seas, but as a landscape of imagination, where everything pulsed with life and meaning. It was a world where the natural and the supernatural blended seamlessly, where every shadow might hold a story, and every sound might carry a message. In such a world, it is no wonder that terrifying monsters were imagined. They were not separate from daily life. They were woven into its very fabric. And so, as we prepare to meet the first of these beings, hold in your mind the image of this land. See the mist drifting through the trees, hear the quiet lap of water against stone, and feel the soft weight of night settling over the fields. This is the Celtic world, a place both beautiful and unsettling, calm yet alive with unseen presence. It is here, in this land of mist and myth, that our journey into the realm of monsters truly begins. Long before these stories were written down, before scholars gathered them into books or poets reshaped them for new audiences, the tales of Celtic monsters and spirits lived only in the breath of those who told them. They were carried on the voices of bards, passed from parent to child, and whispered in gatherings where memory was the only library. To enter this older world of storytelling is to imagine nights when people sat close together, not only for warmth but for companionship, listening as words rose and fell like music, weaving images that lingered long after the fire burned low. In such moments, myth was not separate from life. It was life, given form and voice, shaping the way people understood their world and their place within it. The Celts were a people of oral tradition. Their histories, their laws, their songs, and their stories all lived through the human voice, remembered with great care and passed along with skill. The keepers of these memories were the Druids and the bards, figures of deep respect and mystery. A Druid was not merely a priest but a teacher, a philosopher, a guardian of wisdom. A bard was more than a singer. He was a living vessel of the culture's imagination, trained to remember vast cycles of poetry, line after line, without the help of written words. When a bard told of monsters lurking in the dark woods or of spirits crying in the night, his voice carried with it the weight of generations. Each retelling was both ancient and new, alive in the moment, yet anchored to the past. To imagine this, picture yourself in a circle lit only by firelight. A bard begins to speak, his words slow at first, almost like an incantation. The listeners grow quiet, drawn into the rhythm, into the lilt of a language shaped for music as much as for meaning. The story unfolds not as a simple account of events, but as a performance, with pauses that allow the fire to crackle, with repetitions that echo like footsteps in a cave. In this way, the story sinks deeply into memory, easy to recall and retell. The monsters who appear in such tales become more than characters. They become presences, known to every listener, feared and respected long after the voice has fallen silent. The act of remembering was itself sacred. To forget a story was to risk breaking a link in the chain of culture, to lose a piece of wisdom or warning meant for the community. That is why these tales endured for centuries, held not in books but in minds and hearts. Children would hear them at an age when imagination ran wild, and those images would remain vivid throughout their lives. When they grew older, they too would repeat the stories, shaping them slightly, perhaps, but always preserving their essence. Thus, a monster like the banshee or the kelpie was never allowed to vanish. These figures survived because they were woven into the very fabric of memory. It is important to understand that these stories were not told only for entertainment. They carried lessons, reminders of the dangers that lurked in the natural world and in human life. A tale of a creature dragging someone beneath the waters was a warning not to wander near the loch at night. A story of spirits wailing in the darkness was a way of preparing people for the inevitability of death and of honoring those who had gone before. By framing these truths in the form of myth, the Celts made them easier to hold, easier to pass down, and easier to remember. Monsters, then, were teachers as much as terrors. In this way, the memory of monsters worked like a compass. It guided behavior, shaped respect for the land, and created a shared sense of mystery. People did not need to see the creatures to believe in them. Hearing their names, picturing their forms, was enough to remind them that the world was larger than what they could touch and see. Each generation inherited not just the fear, but the wisdom embedded in these tales. By keeping the memory alive, the Celts ensured that their world remained full of meaning, even in its most shadowed corners. And yet, there was another layer to this tradition. The telling of stories was not only about remembering the past. It was about bringing the unseen into the present moment. When a bard described the sound of the banshee's cry or the glistening skin of a kelpie, it was as though those beings drew near, summoned by the power of words. The audience might glance nervously toward the darkness outside, wondering if the story itself had called something into the night. This was the magic of oral tradition. It did not merely recount events. It created presence. The monsters were real not because they had been seen, but because they were felt in the silence between words, in the hush of listeners leaning closer to the fire. Even now, when we tell these stories, we echo that ancient practice. We become part of the same chain of memory, keeping alive beings who might otherwise fade into silence. The rhythm of the voice, the images forming in the mind, the gentle rise and fall of breath as a listener drifts toward sleep. These are the same elements that sustained myth across centuries. Memory is not only in books. It is in the quiet act of listening, in the willingness to let words shape our imagination. As you hear these tales tonight, you are part of this tradition too. The monsters we will meet are not bound by time. They live in the stories themselves, carried forward each time their names are spoken. In this way, myth becomes more than history, more than imagination. It becomes a living presence, woven into the human experience of wonder and fear, of life and death, of memory and forgetting. So let us hold gently to these stories, as those before us once did. Let us listen not with anxiety, but with calm, knowing that even the darkest monsters are softened when wrapped in the folds of memory. As the fire of our imagination flickers, as shadows shift in the corners of thought, the voices of the old bards seem to join us, whispering across time. Their words, preserved in memory, invite us onward, deeper into the twilight world where myth and monster dwell together. When we think of monsters, it is easy to imagine creatures meant only to frighten, things that leap from shadows or roar in ways meant to terrify. But the Celtic imagination held monsters in a different light. These beings were not simple villains or enemies to be defeated. They were woven into the very fabric of life, reflections of forces both natural and spiritual, embodiments of fear, and sometimes guardians of wisdom. To the Celts, monsters were not just frightening shapes in the dark. They were mirrors of the mysteries of existence, standing at the edges of human understanding. The Celtic world was a place alive with contradictions, gentle hillsides giving way to dangerous bogs, calm seas that could shift into violent storms, and nights filled with both silence and unsettling cries. Out of these landscapes came creatures that embodied the uncertainty of life. A monster might remind a community of the dangers hidden in the waters, or of the inevitability of death, or of the consequences of greed or arrogance. In this sense, they were symbols more than enemies. Their terrifying forms carried meaning, and to ignore them was to risk ignoring the lessons they offered. Unlike the monsters of Greek mythology, who often had clear roles as obstacles to be overcome by heroes, or the creatures of Norse sagas, who stood as foes in a cosmic struggle, Celtic monsters were more elusive. They were not always defeated. They were often endured, respected, or even bargained with. They blurred boundaries between human and animal, between life and death, between the physical and the spiritual. A monster could be a shapeshifter, appearing first as a friendly figure and later as a terrifying beast. Another might be both a bringer of doom and a messenger of truth. The ambiguity was part of their power. To fear them was natural, but to understand them was essential. Imagine standing at the edge of a dark lake, the water smooth and reflective under the moonlight. To the eye, it seems calm, even beautiful. But in the Celtic imagination, that calmness might hide a water horse waiting to drag the unwary beneath. The lesson was clear: appearances can deceive, and what looks harmless may carry danger beneath the surface. Or imagine hearing the sound of a woman's cry in the night. To one person, it might sound like grief, to another, like warning. To the Celts, it was the banshee, a figure whose sorrowful wail carried a truth more profound than fear. She was terrifying, yes, but she was also a reminder that death is part of the human journey. The sound of her cry could chill the heart, but it also spoke of love, loss, and the threads that bind families together. Many Celtic monsters carried this dual nature, terrifying to behold, but meaningful in their presence. They were both danger and teacher, curse and guide. The Dullahan, the headless rider who would gallop across the countryside with his severed head tucked beneath his arm, might seem like a nightmare made flesh. Yet in his dreadful appearance was a truth about mortality, that no one could escape the end, and that death would come regardless of status or wealth. In telling his story, the Celts acknowledged the inevitability of fate while giving it a form that could be both feared and respected. Shape-shifting was another common theme, for the Celts understood the world as fluid and ever-changing. A monster might appear as a handsome man or a beautiful woman, only to reveal itself later as a beast. The puka, for example, could take many forms, sometimes a dark horse with gleaming eyes, sometimes a goat, sometimes even a human figure. This uncertainty reflected a world in which nothing was fixed, where danger might be hidden beneath charm, and where appearances could never be trusted entirely. Such creatures reminded listeners to be cautious, to look beyond the surface, and to respect the unknown. Monsters also existed as guardians of boundaries. They marked the edges of human safety, the edge of the village, the depth of the forest, the shore of the sea. To cross into their territory was to risk stepping beyond the known world, into a space where human laws no longer applied. In this way, they served as warnings. Do not wander too far into the night, or you may meet the spirits of the dead. Do not swim too deep into the loch, or the water horse may seize you. Do not disrespect the offerings left at the old stones, or the fair folk may take offense. Through monsters, the community maintained its respect for limits, for the unseen, and for the sacred. And yet, the Celtic imagination did not always cast these beings as purely malevolent. Some were tricksters, mischievous rather than destructive, their pranks serving to amuse or to humble. Others were tragic figures, cursed or bound by fate, inspiring not only fear but also sorrow. The stories could evoke compassion as much as dread, for the Celts understood that monsters, too, were part of the larger cycle of existence. In their strangeness and terror, they reflected truths about human vulnerability, about the fragility of life, and about the presence of mystery in every corner of the world. Listening to these tales, one begins to see that the nature of Celtic monsters was not fixed in one form. They shifted as the stories shifted, taking on new meanings with each telling. For some, they were cautionary tales. For others, they were embodiments of natural forces. For still others, they were spiritual messengers. Their very ambiguity is what allowed them to endure, for they could always be retold in ways that fit the needs of the community. In this way, monsters were like shadows, sometimes frightening, sometimes protective, always shifting with the light. As we prepare to meet these creatures one by one, it is important to remember this nature. They are not merely figures of horror. They are part of the Celtic vision of the world, where everything was alive with presence and meaning. When you hear of the kelpie, think not only of danger, but of the beauty and mystery of water. When you hear of the banshee, think not only of sorrow, but of the love and memory carried in her cry. When you hear of the Dullahan, think not only of fear, but of the truth that every life has its ending. And so, with a spirit of calm curiosity, let us step further into the realm of Celtic monsters. They may seem terrifying, but through the soft rhythm of story, they become companions on our journey, guiding us gently into deeper reflection. They remind us that fear itself can be a teacher, and that even in the shadows, there is wisdom to be found. Among the many creatures of Celtic imagination, few are as haunting or as captivating as the kelpie. The kelpie is said to dwell in the still waters of Scotland's lochs and rivers, a spirit of shape and shadow, dangerous and beautiful in equal measure. To speak of it is to picture a horse unlike any other, its coat dark as night, its mane dripping with water, its eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. This horse might appear suddenly, waiting by the banks of a river, its form inviting and strange, as though asking to be approached. For those who drew near, the danger was subtle at first, hidden beneath a surface of beauty and mystery. But the kelpie was not a gift to be admired. It was a lure, a trap, a being that could pull the unwary beneath the waters, never to be seen again. The story of the kelpie begins in the stillness of water itself. For the Celts, water was both life and death, a source of nourishment and a place of peril. It could be calm, reflecting the sky like a mirror, yet beneath that calm it held darkness and depth. It was easy to see the surface as peaceful, yet everyone knew how quickly a current could sweep a person away, or how swiftly a body could vanish beneath the loch, swallowed without sound. The kelpie embodied this paradox. It was water given form, beautiful and terrible, a reminder that the loch could charm the eye even as it hid dangers beyond imagining. Legends describe the kelpie as a horse most often, but it was also said to be a shapeshifter. Sometimes it appeared as a magnificent steed, its muscles strong, its coat glistening as though lit from within. Children were often the first to notice it, for the creature could appear playful, stamping its hooves and tossing its head as though inviting them to climb onto its back. Other times, the kelpie might take the form of a handsome young man, dripping with water, his hair sleek and shining, his gaze deep and unsettling. In whatever form it chose, its purpose was always the same: to draw humans close enough to capture them, to drag them into the depths where air gave way to silence. One of the most chilling details in kelpie tales is the stickiness of its skin. Those who touched it found their hands clinging, unable to let go. A child who stroked the kelpie's mane might find themselves bound to it. A traveler who mounted its back would discover, too late, that they were trapped, their body fixed to the creature as though fused with it. Once caught, there was no escape. The kelpie would plunge into the loch, carrying its victims beneath, and the water would close silently above them. The only trace left behind might be the ripple of disturbed water, the echo of a splash in the night. These tales were often told to warn children not to wander near the lochs alone. In places where deep waters could be perilous, where drowning was a constant danger, the kelpie served as a terrifying reminder. It was more effective than a simple warning, for the image of the water horse stayed alive in the mind, unforgettable. To imagine the gleaming eyes, the wet mane, the sudden plunge into darkness. This was a story powerful enough to keep children cautious and adults respectful. The kelpie was not only a monster, it was a guardian of safety, its fearsome tale keeping the living away from danger. But the kelpie was not always told of in whispers of fear. Sometimes, its stories carried a strange allure. There was beauty in its form, even as it brought death. The shimmering of water on its skin, the strength of its body, the wild freedom it suggested. All of these gave it a tragic fascination. In this way, the kelpie reflected the Celtic view of nature itself, beautiful to behold, yet never to be tamed, always capable of sudden destruction. Just as a calm day at sea could shift into a storm, so the kelpie could shift from beauty to terror in a heartbeat. It was not evil in a human sense. It was simply the embodiment of nature's danger, given voice and form through myth. There are tales, too, of how the kelpie could be subdued. In some versions, if a bridle could be thrown over its head, the creature could be controlled, its power bound to the one who held the reins. Such a bridle was no ordinary piece of tack, but a magical tool, sometimes said to be made of iron, forged with charms of protection. To catch a kelpie was to harness the strength of the lock itself. The stories say that those who managed this feat could use the kelpie's power to plow fields, to carry heavy burdens, or to perform feats of impossible labor. Yet such victories were rare, and the kelpie's freedom was never held for long. It always returned to the waters, slipping free, its gaze gleaming once more in the moonlight. The kelpie also carried symbolic weight in the Celtic imagination. It represented not only the danger of water but the danger of desire, of temptation that seemed harmless at first but ended in ruin. To climb upon the kelpie's back was to give in to curiosity or greed, to seek beauty or strength without caution. The punishment was swift and final. In this way, the kelpie story became a lesson not only about locks and rivers, but about the choices humans make, about the importance of wisdom and restraint. Over time, the kelpie's tale spread beyond the highlands, blending into other folklore and inspiring countless later legends. It is not difficult to see its shadow in later stories of ghostly horses, of shapeshifters who lure the unsuspecting, of creatures that embody the dangers hidden beneath beauty. Even now, in places near Scottish waters, people speak of the kelpie with a kind of reverence. Sculptures have been raised, poems written, songs sung. The monster has not vanished. It has simply changed shape once again, as all Celtic beings seem to do, shifting from fearsome warning into cultural memory. As you imagine the kelpie tonight, picture the stillness of a dark loch. The moonlight dances across its surface, silver ripples shifting with every breath of wind. At first, the scene is quiet, peaceful. But then, at the edge of the water, a shape emerges. A horse stands there, its mane dripping, its eyes catching the light in a way that seems both mesmerizing and unsettling. For a moment, you might feel drawn to it, your heart beating faster, your mind whispering that it could not be real. Yet the longer you look, the more you sense the danger that lingers beneath. The water stirs, the horse stamps its hoof, and you know, this is no ordinary creature. This is the kelpie, waiting. The story of the kelpie is not one of simple horror. It is a meditation on the nature of beauty and danger, of temptation and consequence. It is a story that reminds us to respect what lies beyond our control, to honor the mystery of water and the power of nature. Told in the soft glow of firelight, it is a tale that chills the mind even as it soothes the heart with its rhythm. And as the water horse fades once more into the loch, we are left with both fear and wonder, with a memory that lingers like mist drifting across the surface of the lake. Among all the beings whispered of in Celtic folklore, none carries the same haunting chill as the banshee. The very name sends a shiver along the spine, for the banshee was not a monster that struck with claws or teeth, nor did she drag victims beneath the water as the kelpie did. Instead, she was a herald, a messenger of death, her presence felt in the spaces between silence and sound. To hear her cry in the stillness of night was to know that death was near, that a loved one would soon pass from the world of the living into the world beyond. It was not her touch that killed, nor her gaze that wounded, but her wail, a sound unlike any other, piercing yet mournful, beautiful yet unbearable, carrying across the fields and valleys like a sorrowful song. The banshee, in the old Irish tongue, is known as Bean Sidhe, the woman of the fairy mound. She is bound to the other world, that realm beyond mortal eyes, a place of spirits, fairies, and ancestral beings. Unlike the monstrous kelpie or the wrathful Baylor, the banshee was not a creature of aggression. She was an omen, a presence, the bridge between worlds. Some saw her as cruel, for her cry brought dread, but others understood her as a mourner, a weeping spirit who gave voice to grief before grief arrived. Her cry was not the cause of death but the echo of it, a lament that preceded the final breath of those chosen by fate. Descriptions of the banshee vary, for she was a shapeshifter in her own way. Sometimes she appeared as a young woman, radiant yet sorrowful, her beauty pale and otherworldly, her hair long and flowing as though caught in a wind that others could not feel. At other times, she was seen as an old crone, bent and wrinkled, her eyes red from endless weeping, her hands twisted like the roots of an ancient tree. In either form, she was unmistakable, for her aura was heavy with sorrow, her very presence pulling at the heart with an ache that could not be explained. In some tales, she wore a cloak of gray, in others a dress of white or green, colors tied to mourning and the fairy realm. Always, she was a figure at the edge of vision, never quite belonging to the world of the living. The most famous and feared sign of the banshee was her keening cry. In Ireland, keening was a tradition of women mourning the dead, raising their voices in long, wailing lamentations at funerals. It was a song of grief, of farewell, and of deep love. The banshee's cry echoed this tradition, but it came before death, not after. To hear it outside one's window in the still of night, or carried on the wind across the countryside, was to know that death already hovered close. Some said the cry was soft, almost tender, like a lullaby filled with sorrow. Others described it as sharp and piercing, a sound that struck fear into the bones and made sleep impossible. Always, it was unforgettable, and once heard, it lingered in memory forever. There were families, it was said, to whom the banshee was especially tied. Old Irish lore tells that she followed certain noble houses, appearing when a member was about to die. These families could trace their lineage back to ancient times, and the banshee was thought to be connected to their ancestors, a guardian spirit of sorrow who never left their side. For these houses, the banshee was both feared and strangely respected, for though her cry brought grief, it also reminded them that they were never alone in their mourning. Death was not a solitary passage, but one accompanied by voices from the otherworld. In the calm light of storytelling, the banshee can be seen not merely as a figure of terror, but as a mirror of grief itself. Death is inevitable, and sorrow is part of every human life. The banshee gave shape to that sorrow, gave sound to the unspoken ache that dwells in the heart. To imagine her as an old woman with eyes red from weeping is to see grief embodied, grief that is ancient, grief that belongs to all. To picture her as a pale young maiden is to see sorrow still fresh, still sharp, still piercing. The duality of her forms reminds us that grief can be both timeless and immediate, both old and ever new. Many wondered whether the banshee's presence was a curse or a kindness. On one hand, her cry was dreaded, for it meant the shadow of loss would soon fall. On the other, her cry gave warning, allowing families to prepare, to gather, to face death not in sudden shock, but with some sense of readiness. In this way, she could be seen as compassionate, as one who mourned alongside mortals, sharing their sorrow before they even knew it would come. Her lament, though terrifying, was also deeply human, for it spoke of love, of parting, of the pain of letting go. There are stories of people who encountered the banshee more directly. Travelers walking lonely roads at night claimed to see her crouched beneath trees, combing her long hair with a silver comb, her face hidden but her song carrying on the wind. Others spoke of glimpsing her outside a home, weeping softly by the window, her figure vanishing into mist as soon as it was approached. Some legends warn against picking up a comb found lying on the ground, for it might belong to the banshee, and to touch it was to invite her sorrow into one's life. These small, quiet details gave her an air of mystery and intimacy, as though she were not only a figure of legend, but a shadow moving among ordinary lives. The banshee's presence also reveals the Celtic way of viewing the otherworld. In their belief, the realms of the living and the dead were never entirely separate. They touched in places, overlapped in times, and beings could move between them. The banshee was one such being, standing between life and death, never belonging fully to either. She reminded mortals of this closeness, of the thin veil between worlds. Her cry was not only a warning of death, but also a reminder that the living and the dead are forever linked, that grief is not the end but the sign of bonds that endure beyond the grave. When told as a bedtime story, the banshee's tale becomes less about fear and more about reflection. Imagine lying in the quiet of night, the wind sighing against the window, the world hushed and still. Suddenly, from the distance, a sound rises. It is soft at first, like the faintest note of a song, then stronger, carrying with it a wave of sorrow so deep it touches your very chest. The sound swells and fades, as though coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. You cannot see her, but you know she is near, her presence woven into the sound of the night. In that moment, you feel the fragility of life, the preciousness of every breath, the certainty that all things pass, but love remains. To close your eyes and think of the banshee is to hear grief given voice. It is to understand that sorrow, though heavy, is also a sign of love, for we mourn only because we care. The banshee keens not out of malice, but out of recognition, acknowledging the depth of human bonds. She is the eternal mourner, standing at the edge of the world, her cry forever joining the living with the dead. And though her wail may chill the soul, it also comforts, for it reminds us that in our grief, we are never truly alone. In the shadowed edges of Celtic mythology, long before the more familiar tales of heroes and gods took shape, there was a race of beings unlike any other, the Fomorians. They were not gentle spirits, nor kind guardians of land or sea. They were giants of chaos, creatures who embodied the raw, destructive forces of nature. When people spoke of them, they spoke of darkness rising from the sea, of storms crashing upon the shore, of famine sweeping across the fields. The Fomorians were not bound by compassion or order. They were the living essence of turmoil itself, and in their stories we glimpse the Celtic struggle to make sense of the wild, uncontrollable powers that surrounded their world. The very name Fomorian, in its older tongue, suggests something born from beneath the sea or from the underworld depths. This connection to the sea is telling, for to the ancient Celts the sea was both life-giving and threatening. It brought fish, trade, and discovery, yet it also carried storms and the unknown. The Fomorians rose from these waters, towering beings whose forms were monstrous and strange. Some were said to have a single eye, burning and terrible, others with limbs misshapen, bodies deformed, or faces twisted beyond recognition. They were not creatures of balance or harmony, but distortions, reminders that nature, while beautiful, can also be unpredictable and cruel. The Fomorians were not merely monsters to frighten children. They were woven into the great cycles of Celtic myth, especially in the battles for Ireland itself. They stood in opposition to the Tuatha Dé Danann, the shining tribe of gods and heroes who embodied knowledge, skill, and artistry. Where the Tuatha Dé Danann represented light, craft, and order, the Fomorians stood for darkness, destruction, and disorder. In this way, they were not simply villains, but the necessary counterpart to the forces of creation. Without chaos, order has no meaning. Without storm, calm is not cherished. The Fomorians gave shape to this contrast, embodying everything that lay beyond the control of humankind. Legends tell of Balor, one of the most feared of the Fomorian leaders. His single eye was said to be so powerful that when it opened, it unleashed a beam of destruction that could wither armies and scorch the land. He kept this eye closed most of the time, heavy and sealed with lids that only he could lift, for its power was too immense to wield carelessly. Yet when battle called, when fury demanded, Balor would raise his eye, and the world would tremble. He was not alone, of course. The Fomorians gathered around him in multitudes, their size immense, their strength overwhelming, their presence like a storm on the horizon. The battles between the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Fomorians are some of the most powerful stories of Celtic myth. They are not simply tales of armies clashing, but symbolic struggles between light and darkness, between creation and destruction, between the forces that build and those that tear down. When the Tuatha Dé Danann brought with them skill and invention, the Fomorians brought plague, drought, and hunger. They demanded tribute from the people, not only in wealth, but in lives. They were tyrants, yet they were also forces of nature, unstoppable and eternal. No one could truly destroy them, for chaos is never gone. It is only held at bay. What is most fascinating about the Fomorians is that they were not depicted as entirely separate from the human world. They intermingled, sometimes taking human wives, sometimes fathering children who would go on to play vital roles in myth. This blending of monstrous and human blood shows that chaos was not seen as something distant, but as something woven into existence itself. Humanity could not escape the shadow of the Fomorians, for it lived within them too, in their flaws, their fears, their capacity for destruction as well as creation. The Fomorians also reflect the Celtic understanding of the harshness of life. To live in early Ireland was to live with constant uncertainty, harsh winters, sudden storms, crop failures, and illness. The Fomorians were the embodiment of these struggles. They gave face to famine, to disease, to natural disaster. In a way, their myth offered explanation. When crops failed, it was not meaningless. It was the Fomorians demanding their due. When storms wrecked the shore, it was their wrath breaking through. This gave shape to the inexplicable, turning the terrors of existence into stories that could be told and understood, even if they could not be defeated. And yet, as much as they were feared, the Fomorians carried a certain awe. Their size, their might, their sheer otherness made them figures of fascination. To imagine them is to picture giants rising from the sea, their forms half hidden in mist, their voices booming like thunder. They stand as reminders of the power of the untamed, the vastness of forces that no human hand can control. Even in defeat at the hands of the Tuatha De Danann, the Fomorians remain. They do not vanish. They simply retreat, lurking at the edges of the world, waiting, always ready to return when balance tips once more toward chaos. If we allow ourselves to slow down and picture them in the stillness of night, the Fomorians come alive in the imagination. Imagine the sea stretching dark and endless before you, its waves restless, its depths unknowable. Then, rising slowly from the waters, comes a figure. Taller than the trees, broader than the hills, its eye gleams like fire in the distance. Around it, others rise, their bodies deformed yet powerful, their presence filling the horizon. They do not speak in words but in the language of storm and wave. To stand before them is to feel small, to feel the fragility of humanity against the vastness of chaos. Yet, in this vision, there is also calm. For the story of the Fomorians is not one of despair, but of balance. They remind us that chaos is part of the pattern, that destruction makes way for renewal, that even in loss there is the seed of creation. The Celtic myths do not offer us a world without struggle. They offer us a world in which struggle is the rhythm of existence itself. The Fomorians embody that struggle, terrifying yet necessary, monstrous yet meaningful. As the story drifts toward rest, we can see the Fomorians not only as figures of fear, but as shadows that give light its brilliance. They stand at the edges of myth, forever looming, forever threatening, yet also forever ensuring that life, fragile and fleeting, is cherished all the more. And so, when we hear the wind howl, or the waves crash, or the storm break suddenly across the sky, perhaps we hear the echo of the Fomorian still, whispering of chaos, reminding us of the forces that shaped the world long before our time, and will continue long after. Among the goddesses of Celtic myth, none is more mysterious, more haunting, or more feared than the Morrigan. Her name drifts through the old stories like a shadow carried on the wind, whispering of battle, prophecy, and death. She was not a gentle goddess of hearth or harvest, nor was she the distant starry queen of the heavens. The Morrigan walked the battlefield, cloaked in darkness, her voice carried on the cries of crows, her presence a sign that fate itself was unfolding. She was the goddess of war and fate, yet she was also the embodiment of sovereignty, the spirit of the land, and the reminder that life and death are bound together in eternal rhythm. The Morrigan's name is often translated as Great Queen or Phantom Queen, and both meanings reveal her nature. She was queenly in her power, commanding respect and reverence, but she was also ghostly, drifting at the edges of human understanding. She was said to take many forms, sometimes appearing as a woman of great beauty, her dark hair flowing, her eyes shining with knowledge and dread. At other times, she appeared as a crone, bent and terrible, her voice sharp as iron. Most famously, she appeared as a crow, perched on the shoulders of warriors, circling above battlefields, her wings cutting the sky like blades. Wherever she appeared, death soon followed. The Morrigan was not a goddess who fought with weapons in hand. Instead, her weapon was knowledge, prophecy, and the weaving of fate itself. She foretold the deaths of warriors, choosing who would fall and who would endure. Her cry, sharp and cutting, echoed like a verdict. To hear her voice was to know that one's fate was sealed, that no strength or courage could change what was already decided. In this way, she resembled the banshee, yet her role was far more commanding. The banshee mourned death as it approached. The Morrigan decided it. She was not the voice of grief, but the voice of destiny. Her connection to battle was not only symbolic, but visceral. Legends tell of her moving across the battlefield, her form shifting, her cries rising above the clash of steel. Some warriors claim to see her washing bloody armor in rivers before battle, a vision that foretold whose life would soon be lost. Others claim to hear her laughter amid the fighting, a sound more terrifying than the clash of swords. To fight beneath her gaze was to feel the weight of inevitability, to know that the outcome was not entirely in mortal hands. She was there not to kill, but to remind that death is always part of the bargain of war. The Morrigan was also deeply tied to the land itself. In Celtic thought, the land was sacred, and kingship was not simply a matter of power but of harmony with the spirit of the earth. The Morrigan embodied that spirit. She was the voice of the land, granting or withdrawing her favor. A king who ruled justly might find her support, but one who failed his people or broke the sacred balance could face her wrath. In this way, she was both terrifying and protective, for though she was feared, she was also essential. Without her blessing, no rule could stand. Her story is deeply entwined with that of the hero Cú Chulainn, one of the greatest figures of Irish myth. The Morrigan is said to have approached him before battle, sometimes in the guise of a beautiful young woman offering her love and aid. When he rejected her, failing to recognize her true nature, she revealed herself and declared that she would oppose him. Later, during his battles, she appeared in various forms, a wolf, a cow, an eel, trying to hinder him. Yet even in opposition, their relationship was strange, filled with a sense of inevitability. For when Cú Chulainn met his final fate, mortally wounded, the Morrigan was there, in the form of a crow, watching as he tied himself to a standing stone to die on his feet. She did not strike him down, but she bore witness, her presence sealing the destiny she had long foretold. The Morrigan is often depicted not as a single being, but as a triple goddess, a figure divided into three sisters or aspects. Sometimes they are named as Bab, Machu, and Nemain, each with her own flavor of power and terror. Bab, the crow, brought fury and confusion to battle, her shrieks terrifying warriors until they scattered in panic. Machu was linked to kingship and the land, her power tied to sovereignty itself. Nemain embodied frenzy, driving men into madness with her cries. Together, these aspects formed a goddess both many in one, embodying the fullness of war, fate, and sovereignty. This triadic nature reflects a common Celtic theme, where power is not singular but layered, weaving multiple truths into one whole. Though she was a figure of fear, the Morrigan was not simply malevolent. She embodied the inevitability of death, but she also embodied renewal. For just as fields must lie fallow before new crops grow, so too must lives end for new generations to rise. The Morrigan's presence was a reminder that death is part of life, that war, though tragic, is woven into the story of humanity. She was terrifying because she was honest. She did not soften truth or hide fate behind illusions. She revealed what was coming, whether mortals wished to hear it or not. To imagine the Morrigan in the stillness of night is to picture a battlefield long after the clash has ended. The air is heavy, the ground littered with silence. Then, upon a stone, a crow settles, its feathers dark against the fading light. It tilts its head, its black eyes gleaming, and from its throat rises a cry, a sound that cuts through the quiet, sharp and piercing. In that cry, one hears both loss and destiny, both sorrow and certainty. The crow takes flight, circling once before vanishing into the shadows, leaving only the echo behind. This is the Morrigan, elusive, commanding, impossible to ignore. Even today, her image endures, woven into poetry, song, and art. She has become a symbol not only of battle, but of strength, sovereignty, and feminine power. She reminds us that to live is to face death, to accept that endings are part of beginnings. Her story is one of fear, yes, but also of wisdom, for she teaches that fate cannot be outrun, that the true measure of life lies not in avoiding death, but in meeting it with courage. As you drift into rest, let the Morrigan's tale settle in your mind, not as terror, but as reflection. She is the crow on the battlefield, the whisper of fate, the voice of the land itself. She does not seek to frighten, but to remind us of truth, that every life has its course, every ruler their time, every warrior their end. And in that truth, there is a strange peace, for to accept fate is to live fully in the moments given. The Morrigan is the shadow that makes the light more precious, the silence that makes each heartbeat heard. In the quiet hours after sunset, when the world grows still and shadows stretch across the hills, the puka begins to stir. Unlike the grim and fearsome Fomorians or the death-haunted wail of the banshee, the puka is a creature of mischief, a trickster spirit who delights in confusing and unsettling mortals. Its name, simple and playful, hides a being whose nature is far from harmless. The puka was both feared and strangely cherished, for it was unpredictable, sometimes bringing fortune, sometimes disaster, but always leaving behind a sense of the uncanny. To tell its story is to step into the twilight, where laughter mixes with unease, and where every rustling bush might conceal a pair of gleaming, mischievous eyes. The puka, in legend, could take many forms. Most often, it appeared as a sleek black horse with eyes that glowed like embers and a mane that shimmered in the moonlight. To see such a horse waiting by the roadside was no small matter, for the puka's favorite trick was to lure travelers onto its back. Once mounted, the rider would find themselves trapped, unable to dismount, as the puka galloped wildly through fields, over rivers, and across stony hills. The ride was terrifying, yet it never ended in true harm. At dawn, the puka would deposit its riders safely back where they began, or sometimes miles away, exhausted and bewildered, with no idea how they had survived the night. But the puka was not bound to the shape of a horse alone. It was a shapeshifter of boundless imagination. Sometimes it appeared as a goat with curling horns and laughing eyes, sometimes as a dog whose fur gleamed unnaturally in the moonlight, and sometimes even as a rabbit darting through the grass, leading hunters astray. In all its forms, it carried the same spirit of mischief, the same delight in turning the familiar into the strange. The Celts, with their deep reverence for animals, must have found this unsettling. To see a creature of the everyday suddenly act with supernatural cunning was to be reminded that the boundary between natural and otherworldly was very thin indeed. The puka's tricks were not always cruel. In some tales, it offered warnings, its sudden appearance signaling danger nearby. Farmers spoke of hearing the puka's voice in the night, warning them of storms or advising them when to harvest their crops. In these moments, the puka seemed like a guardian, mischievous but protective, a spirit that teased even as it guided. Yet in other stories, it was a tormentor, spoiling crops, frightening livestock, or chasing travelers until they collapsed from exhaustion. The puka's true nature could never be pinned down. It was as likely to bless as to curse, as likely to laugh with you as to laugh at you. What makes the puka so captivating is this sense of duality. It was not wholly good, nor wholly evil, but a shifting spirit, unpredictable as the wind. This reflected the Celtic understanding of life itself, where fortune could change in an instant, where joy and sorrow walked hand in hand. The puka embodied this truth, reminding mortals that not everything could be controlled, that sometimes the only response to the twists of fate was laughter and endurance. To encounter the puka was to be thrown off balance, yet also to remember that balance is never permanent. The puka also had a curious relationship with human speech. Some legends say it could talk, its voice deep and mocking, or sly and playful, depending on its mood. It was said to approach lonely travelers, offering riddles or questions, delighting in their confusion. There are stories of the puka standing at crossroads, calling out to those who passed by, daring them to follow, promising secrets or treasures. Few who accepted such invitations came away unchanged. They might return with stories of wild rides and dazzling visions, or they might return silent, their eyes haunted, unwilling to speak of what they had seen. Not all feared the puka. In some parts of Ireland, traditions grew around taming or appeasing it. On certain nights, offerings of food were left out, fruits, grains, or milk, to keep the puka from mischief. Farmers believed that if the puka was honored, it would bless their fields instead of ruining them, that it might turn its chaotic energy toward abundance rather than destruction. There were even tales of wise folk who claimed to have bridled the puka, forcing it to serve them for a time, carrying them safely or granting secret knowledge. Yet such control was never permanent. The puka could not be tamed forever. It always slipped free, laughing, vanishing back into the night. The puka was not only a creature of fear or trickery, but also of wonder. To imagine it is to imagine the night itself alive and playful. The rustling of leaves becomes footsteps, the glint of eyes in the hedgerow becomes something more, the laughter on the wind becomes the whisper of a spirit unseen. The puka taught people to notice the strangeness in the ordinary, to remember that even in the most familiar landscape, the other world was near. It was a spirit of liminality, existing in the threshold between safe and unsafe, between laughter and terror, between the known and the unknown. Picture, if you will, a quiet Irish countryside road, the moon high above, its silver light spilling over the stones. The fields lie hushed, the hedgerows whisper with unseen life. Suddenly, ahead, a figure appears, a black horse, tall and gleaming, its mane falling like liquid shadow. Its eyes glow faintly, and as you step closer, it tosses its head, beckoning. You hesitate, yet something in its gaze pulls you forward. Before you realize what you've done, you are astride its back, and the ground vanishes beneath you. The horse gallops faster than the wind, the night rushing past, the world a blur of shadow and silver. You cling desperately, your heart racing, until at last, just as dawn's first light touches the sky, the horse halts. You tumble to the ground, dazed, only to find yourself home again, safe yet shaken, your mind filled with questions you cannot answer. This is the gift and the curse of the puka's ride, terror and wonder entwined. In its way, the puka served a purpose much like other Celtic beings. It kept people alert, respectful, and aware of the unseen forces shaping their lives. While the kelpie warned against the dangers of water, and the banshee prepared families for loss, the puka reminded people of life's unpredictability, of the thin line between safety and risk, between laughter and fear. Its stories carried a lightness that balanced the darker tales, showing that even in the realm of the supernatural, not every encounter was doom. Sometimes it was confusion, sometimes humor, sometimes even a strange kind of joy. As the night deepens and the world grows quiet, the story of the puka lingers like a playful shadow. It is the rustle at the edge of your vision, the trick of the eye that makes you wonder if something more is there. It is the laughter you think you hear on the wind, the flicker of movement in the moonlight that cannot quite be explained. The puka may be a trickster, but it is also a reminder that mystery itself is part of life's beauty. And as you drift toward sleep, perhaps you carry a smile as well as a shiver, for somewhere in the twilight, the puka is still running, still laughing, still carrying mortals on wild rides through the darkened fields of dream. When night deepens and the road lies empty beneath a pale moon, there are tales of a rider who comes not with laughter like the puka, nor with whispered warnings like the banshee, but with silence and inevitability. The Dullahan, the headless rider of Celtic lore, is one of the most haunting figures in Ireland's mythology, a being whose presence signals death itself. Unlike other creatures, the Dullahan is not easily bargained with, not playful, not mischievous. It is a dark messenger, a shadow on horseback, and when its black steed is heard galloping across the stones, hearts quail, for it means a soul is soon to depart this world. The Dullahan's image is unforgettable. Imagine a rider dressed in black, cloaked and hooded, yet where the head should be there is only emptiness. Instead, the rider carries his own head, cradled in one hand or tucked beneath an arm. The head itself is ghastly pale, with skin the color of mold, stretched tight across bone. Its eyes are wide and forever darting, searching the night, and its mouth curls into a smile so grotesque it seems less like joy and more like a grimace carved into stone. The head glows faintly, casting a sickly light, so that those who glimpse it cannot mistake what they are seeing. And the horse, black as shadow, with eyes burning red, carries the rider effortlessly, its hooves striking sparks as it moves. Together, they are the embodiment of dread, a vision that chills the blood of anyone who encounters them. Unlike the puka, who may bring someone home after a wild ride, the Dullahan does not play. Its purpose is singular. It rides to claim a life. Where it stops, death soon follows. In some stories, it is said to call out the name of the person who will die, speaking the word with such finality that no one can resist. In others, the Dullahan does not speak at all, but merely arrives, and the household knows that a passing is near. No lock or barrier can keep it out. Doors swing open, windows yield, walls seem thin as air. The Dullahan enters where it will, for death itself cannot be denied. There are darker details still. In some tales, the Dullahan carries a whip made from a human spine, a weapon that cracks the air with terrifying sound. It is said to use this whip to lash out at those who try to watch or interfere, blinding them or striking them down. To witness the Dullahan was to invite danger, for mortals were not meant to linger in the presence of such a being. If it turned its empty gaze upon you, your days were numbered. Yet there was no anger in its work, no cruelty. The Dullahan was not malicious. It was merely fulfilling its role as a harbinger of death, a role no one could escape. The roots of the Dullahan's myth may stretch back to ancient sacrifices and rituals, for there is a strange echo of old rites in the image of a head carried in the rider's hands. Among the Celts, the head was believed to be the seat of the soul, the essence of life and power. To sever the head was not only an act of violence, but a way of capturing that power. Some scholars believe the Dullahan carries traces of these beliefs, transforming them into a supernatural figure that embodies the finality of mortality. Whether or not this is true, the Dullahan has endured across centuries, its form unchanged, its message clear. Death is never far away, and no one can bargain with it. Yet, despite its grimness, the Dullahan was not entirely without boundaries. Folk tradition held that it feared gold, that even the smallest piece of it could drive it away. To carry a golden coin, it was said, was to hold a charm of protection against the rider. Why gold should hold such power remains a mystery, perhaps because of its incorruptible nature, perhaps because it symbolized purity or divine light. Whatever the reason, this belief gave people a sliver of hope, a way to feel less helpless in the face of an unstoppable figure. Still, the protection was fragile, and few dared to test it. Picture the scene. A family sits quietly in their cottage, the fire low, the night still. Suddenly, in the distance, the sound of hooves strikes the earth, slow at first, then faster, echoing across the hills. The dog whimpers, the fire flickers, and a chill enters the room though the doors remain shut. Outside, the sound grows louder, until the very ground seems to tremble. Then, in the glow of the moon, a rider appears, dark cloak, black horse, head glowing faintly like a lantern from the underworld. The rider halts before the cottage, lifting the head as though to look within. The family dares not breathe. A name is whispered, soft and clear, and at once they know. Someone within will not see another dawn. The rider turns, the horse stamps the ground, sparks leap from its hooves, and together they vanish into the night, leaving silence and fear and the certainty of death. To hear such tales in the old days must have been to feel one's own mortality pressing close. The Dullahan was not only a monster but also a reminder, a living symbol of death's inevitability. While the banshee prepared families with her sorrowful cries, the Dullahan was the moment itself, the crossing, the end of the journey. In the quiet of the night, when people heard the echo of hooves, they knew that all human strength, all wealth, all defenses, meant nothing in the face of what must come to all. Even today, the Dullahan lingers in imagination. Modern stories and images have reshaped it, sometimes painting it as a demonic terror, sometimes as a tragic figure bound to an eternal task. Yet the heart of the legend remains unchanged. The headless rider gallops on, carrying with it the ancient truth that no life is permanent, no road endless, no fire eternal. Its power lies not in cruelty, but in inevitability. in the reminder that to live is to move always closer to that unseen rider. And yet, there is a strange calmness in the tale as well. For if the Dullahan is death itself, then to meet it is not a punishment, but a passage. Its whip may crack, its horse may thunder, its head may grin grotesquely, but all of it is part of the great cycle, the endless rhythm that moves from birth to death to memory. In telling the story, people were not only frightening themselves, they were preparing themselves, wrapping the hardest truth in the cloak of myth, making the unbearable bearable through the power of imagination. As you listen now, perhaps the story feels less terrifying than it might once have. You are not on a lonely road. You are safe, wrapped in the warmth of story. The rider you imagine cannot reach you here. Instead, he serves as a reminder of life's preciousness, of the fleeting beauty of nights like this, of the way each breath is a gift to be noticed. The Dullahan rides for all in time, but for now, it passes by, and we are left in peace, able to rest, able to dream. So as the night grows deeper and sleep begins to settle, let the image of the headless rider drift further from fear and closer to quiet reflection. The hooves grow faint, the glow of the severed head dims, and silence returns to the road. Another story has been told, another monster of Celtic myth revealed, and in its telling, we find not only dread but also a strange comfort. For even in the face of death, the human spirit finds ways to listen, to imagine, and to carry on. In the Celtic imagination, water was never silent, never lifeless. Lakes, rivers, and streams were not simply parts of the landscape, but thresholds, places where the human world brushed against the mysterious otherworld. It is no wonder, then, that so many tales spoke of spirits who dwelled beneath the surface, their pale hands reaching upward, their voices whispering in tones that carried both sorrow and menace. These were the water wraiths, spectral beings bound to the dark depths, and to hear of them was to feel the cold pull of the unknown each time you stood near still water at night. The wraith was often described as a figure of sorrow rather than fury, a shadow of someone who had drowned or who had been claimed by the restless waters. In some stories, these spirits drifted along the edges of lochs and rivers, their forms half seen in the mist, their faces twisted in grief. They did not always attack, but their presence alone was unsettling, a reminder that the water claimed lives as easily as it gave them. To meet a wraith was to feel an unshakable chill, to sense the nearness of death, as though the spirit's sorrow longed to draw you down into its embrace. But there were darker tales as well, stories of lake spirits who did not merely mourn but hunted. These beings were said to emerge at night, their hands pale as bone, their eyes glowing faintly like lanterns beneath the surface. They would call to travelers in voices sweet and melodic, urging them to step closer, to peer into the water. Those who obeyed often found themselves seized, pulled down swiftly, the surface closing above them like a mirror returning to stillness. Such stories warned against curiosity, teaching that not every gentle voice should be trusted, and that the beauty of water might conceal dangers unseen. In the Scottish Highlands, the image of the water wraith was particularly strong. Fishermen told of seeing shapes moving across the lochs at dawn, drifting with the mist, their long arms trailing as though they searched for something lost. If a wraith was seen before a journey, it was considered a dire omen, a warning that the waters would not be kind. And so the wraith, though not always violent, was deeply feared. It was the very embodiment of drowning made into a spirit, the memory of lives claimed by water refusing to vanish quietly. There were also lake spirits of a more ambiguous kind, beings that could bless or curse depending on how they were treated. In some Irish tales, a shimmering woman would rise from the waters, her beauty startling, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. If a mortal treated her with respect, she might offer knowledge or even temporary companionship, but if he mocked or tried to bind her, she would vanish, dragging him down with her. These stories spoke to the belief that water itself had moods, that the lake might smile one day and frown the next, and that humans must approach with reverence if they hoped to be safe. The wraiths also served as guardians of the past. Many believed that treasures and ancient weapons lay hidden beneath the waters, cast there in rituals long forgotten. To seek these was to risk awakening the spirits who watched over them. Divers who dared the depths spoke of strange currents, sudden chills, or the sense of being watched. Sometimes they returned with stories of hands brushing against their skin in the dark, or of shadows moving below where no fish could be. Such warnings kept most away, preserving the sacredness of the waters and keeping the memory of the dead intact. To imagine meeting such a spirit is to imagine silence broken by the ripple of water, the moon reflected in the loch's surface, mist rising in faint silver curls. Then, from the corner of your eye, a figure appears, thin, long-limbed, its face pale, eyes filled with sorrow. It does not rush forward but drifts, its presence enough to send a shiver down your spine. You turn away, but the sound of water follows you, footsteps that are not footsteps, the soft lapping of waves where the shore is still. In such a moment, one understands why these spirits haunted the imagination, for they gave form to the unease that comes when one stands at the edge of a vast, dark lake and wonders what might be beneath. Unlike the wild strength of the kelpie or the fury of storm spirits, the water wraith worked more subtly. It crept into dreams, into the quiet spaces of the mind, reminding people of their fragility before the natural world. Its sorrow was contagious, filling those who saw it with unease, even despair. Some even believed that to look too long into a wraith's eyes was to feel your own will weakening, your thoughts clouding until you stepped willingly into the water, unable to resist. These stories blurred the line between haunting and temptation, showing how grief itself can become a kind of lure. Yet, like many Celtic beings, the wraith was not one-dimensional. It was not simply a villain. In its sadness lay a reflection of human fear and mourning, a reminder of all those who had been lost to the water. By giving shape to this grief, the stories allowed communities to process the tragedies of drowning, to honor the dead by imagining them still present, still watching. In this sense, the wraith was not only a threat but also a memory, a way of keeping alive the lives that water had claimed. As the firelight fades and sleep begins to stir, the thought of the water wraith lingers softly. It is less a monster than a shadow, less a hunter than a whisper. Its form glides through mist and memory, carrying with it the chill of cold water and the ache of loss. To hear its story is to be reminded of the mystery that lies beneath every surface, of the depths that we cannot see. And though the wraith may frighten, it also invites reflection, a gentle reminder that life is fragile and that the waters which nourish can also take. So if you find yourself dreaming of lakes tonight, their surfaces still beneath the moon, know that the wraith may be near, but here, in the safety of story, it cannot reach you. It remains only as a presence in the imagination, drifting slowly back into the mist, leaving behind quiet ripples that fade as the night deepens and sleep carries you further into its calm embrace. Among the figures of Celtic myth, there are few as complex, as haunting, and as powerful as the Morrigan. She is not a simple monster, nor merely a spirit of the night. She is a goddess, a queen, and a phantom who embodies war, fate, and the inevitability of death. To speak of the Morrigan is to step into the heart of Celtic imagination, where battlefields were seen not only as places of blood and steel, but as sacred grounds shaped by unseen powers. Her presence is both terrifying and majestic, for she represents the mystery of destiny itself, an endless weaving of life, conflict, and the shadow that waits at the end. The Morrigan's name means Great Queen or Phantom Queen, and she appears in many forms throughout the myths. Sometimes she is seen as a single figure, tall, dark-haired, and commanding, her eyes filled with both beauty and dread. At other times, she is described as a trio of sisters, each embodying different aspects of her power, Bab, Machu, and Nemain. Together, they form a force that is impossible to resist, the very embodiment of battle's chaos and the certainty of fate. When they appeared on the edge of a fight, the warriors knew that their struggle was not merely with human enemies, but with destiny itself. Her shape-shifting nature was one of her most frightening traits. The Morrigan could appear as a beautiful woman, her voice soft, her gaze captivating, luring men into desire or distraction. But just as swiftly, she could take the form of a crow or raven, black wings beating above the battlefield, circling as death approached. The sight of a crow perched on a branch before a battle was often taken as an omen that the Morrigan watched, that death would soon ride the air. In this way, she blurred the line between goddess and monster, between benefactor and destroyer, between beauty and terror. Her most famous appearances in myth are tied to the hero Cu Chulainn, Ireland's greatest warrior. In one tale, she approached him in the guise of a maiden, offering her love and aid. But Cu Chulainn, proud and focused on his battles, rejected her. Angered, she revealed her true identity and swore to hinder him. Later, she came against him in the forms of a wolf, a heifer, and an eel, striking at him during combat. Though he wounded her in each shape, she later appeared again, disguised as an old woman at a ford, asking for his blessing. When he gave it, not recognizing her, she revealed herself once more, reminding him that no one, not even the greatest of heroes, could escape her power. The Morrigan was not only about death, but about the weaving of fate itself. She spoke prophecies, her voice heavy with inevitability, describing the outcomes of wars before they began. When she declared that a side would fall, it was as though the words themselves carried weight, pressing events toward their destined conclusion. In this way, she was not merely a goddess of war, but of the larger cycles that governed life: conflict, victory, loss, renewal. She was feared not only for her presence on the battlefield, but for her knowledge of what was to come, for her certainty that no one could defy the currents of fate. It is easy to imagine how terrifying her presence must have felt to those who believed in her. A lone warrior, stepping onto the field, might hear the caw of a raven overhead and know that the Morrigan was watching. He might feel the sudden weight of dread, a chill running down his spine, knowing that his own blood could soon soak the earth. And yet, there was no fleeing from it, no hiding. To encounter the Morrigan was to be reminded that courage was not the absence of fear, but the acceptance of it, the willingness to stand even when destiny seemed dark. The Morrigan's ties to crows and ravens also reveal her place in the natural world. These birds, scavengers of battlefields, were a living reminder of mortality. Where war left its dead, the ravens came, their wings black against the sky, their calls echoing in the silence after slaughter. To see them was to see death's aftermath, and so to imagine them as the Morrigan's form was to give a divine shape to that grim reality. She was not only the goddess of the fight, but of its consequences, of the sorrow and the silence that followed. And yet, she was not without reverence. For though she brought fear, she also brought clarity. The Morrigan showed mortals that life was fragile, that glory was fleeting, and that all must eventually bow to the weight of destiny. In her fierce presence, people saw both the terror of war and the strange beauty of fate. She was both destroyer and teacher, forcing humanity to confront truths they might otherwise try to ignore. To picture her now, imagine a figure standing on the edge of a misty battlefield. The clash of swords echoes faintly, the cries of warriors rise and fall, and above it all, a dark shape circles, wings outstretched, eyes gleaming like obsidian. She lands on the branch of a bare tree, her feathers glossy, her beak sharp. For a moment, the raven tilts her head, watching, and then her form shifts. Before the astonished warriors, she stands as a woman cloaked in black, her hair flowing like a river of night, her gaze fixed upon them. Her lips part, and a prophecy flows forth, words that chill the heart, for they reveal the end long before it arrives. In this moment, no one doubts who she is. She is the Morrigan, the Phantom Queen, and her presence ensures that this day will not be forgotten. But the Morrigan was not confined to battle alone. She was also associated with the land itself, with sovereignty and the sacred bond between rulers and the earth. In some tales, she tested kings, offering her love in strange, challenging forms, to see if they were worthy to rule. If a king accepted her, no matter her appearance, it was seen as a sign that he respected the land in all its aspects, its beauty, its harshness, its fertility, and its desolation. In this way, she was more than a goddess of war. She was a goddess of balance, ensuring that power was not taken lightly and that rulers understood the depth of what they held. Even today, the Morrigan holds a strange allure. She has become a figure of fascination, appearing in art, literature, and imagination, often portrayed as both terrifying and alluring. Her duality continues to captivate. The goddess who is both maiden and crone, both crow and queen, both life's protector and life's end. She embodies the paradox of existence itself, the truth that beauty and terror often walk side by side, that destiny is both feared and embraced. As her story settles into the quiet of night, it carries with it a reminder of the mysteries that shape our lives. The Morrigan does not offer comfort in the way gentler spirits might. Instead, she offers truth, the raw truth of mortality, the certainty of change, the power of fate. And though her presence may seem daunting, there is calm in recognizing that such forces lie beyond human control. To surrender to this truth is to rest, to find peace in the acceptance that destiny flows as surely as a river to the sea. So let her black wings drift now into silence, her prophecy fade into the background of dream. The Morrigan has passed through the story once more, leaving us with both awe and unease, with the awareness that life is fragile and precious. And as you drift deeper into sleep, let her image soften. No longer a terrifying figure upon the battlefield, she becomes only a shadow at the edge of the mind, a guardian of fate whose lessons linger even as dreams take hold, carrying you into the stillness of the night. When we move away from the great deities and fearsome goddesses, we find ourselves in a quieter, stranger corner of Celtic mythology, a world not of vast battles and grand prophecies, but of hearths, villages, and lonely paths. It is here, in the folds of ordinary life, that goblins and household spirits dwell. Unlike the Morrigan or Baylor, these beings are not vast figures of cosmic destruction. They are small, grotesque, mischievous, and sometimes helpful, sometimes cruel. Yet for those who lived close to the land, they were no less real, no less powerful in their way. They were the spirits that brushed against daily existence, the unseen presences that reminded humans that even the simplest home or the darkest wood was never truly empty. The Celtic imagination was filled with beings that lived just beyond sight, spirits who slipped through cracks in the world, emerging in moments of stillness or silence. Some were protectors, guarding families, farms, or fields. Others were tricksters, delighting in mischief, leading travelers astray, or making strange noises in the night. Many of them were grotesque in form, described with twisted features, long noses, hunched backs, or leathery skin. Yet, even in their strangeness, they had an important role, for they were the guardians of boundaries, reminding mortals that the world was layered with mystery, that one must tread with care in every corner of existence. One such being was the cluricaun, a cousin to the leprechaun, but less playful and more troublesome. He was said to haunt cellars, particularly those filled with wine or ale, drinking deep into the night and causing chaos for the owners. If angered, a cluricaun might sour the drink, break bottles, or ride the family's animals until they were exhausted. But if treated well, if given respect and a little share of the drink, he could protect the cellar, keeping thieves away and ensuring the stores lasted. In this way, he was both a nuisance and a guardian, a grotesque yet oddly loyal spirit who demanded recognition. Then there were the puka, beings of shape-shifting mischief, who might appear as dark horses with glowing eyes, or as goats, rabbits, or even men. The puka delighted in leading travelers astray, luring them into bogs or deep into forests until they were lost. Yet in some stories, they also offered rides on their backs, carrying mortals through wild, exhilarating journeys before dropping them safely home again. The dual nature of the puka, both frightening and strangely generous, captured the Celtic sense of ambiguity, the belief that the otherworld was not simply good or evil, but a shifting mixture of both. Household spirits were also common in the tales. Families spoke of small beings who lived near the hearth, watching over the fire, helping with chores, or guarding the threshold. Some were thought to be ancestors lingering close, others mischievous creatures who attached themselves to homes. To live peacefully with them required rituals of respect, leaving out bowls of milk or crumbs of bread, whispering kind words into the dark. If neglected or insulted, these beings could turn hostile, hiding objects, creating strange noises, or bringing illness into the household. In this way, they reinforced the idea that balance and respect were crucial, that even the smallest unseen neighbor deserved acknowledgement. The grotesque appearance of many goblins and spirits served as a reminder that the sacred and the strange often dwell together. A hunched, long-limbed figure glimpsed in a dream or shadow might seem terrifying, but it could also be a warning, a protector, or simply a being passing through. For the Celts, the world was layered with unseen presences, and to deny them was to invite misfortune. It was safer and wiser to recognize them, to offer respect, and to live with the awareness that the unseen was always close. Imagine, for a moment, a quiet Celtic cottage. The fire burns low, its embers glowing red in the hearth. The family has gone to sleep, the night wrapped in silence. Outside, the wind whispers through the trees, carrying with it the cries of owls and the distant sound of water. But within the cottage, small creaks echo, as though someone walks lightly across the floor. A cup shifts, a faint laugh seems to rise from nowhere. To those who lived in such places, there was no doubt. This was the presence of the household spirit, watching, reminding them that they shared their space with something otherworldly. Stories also told of grotesque guardians at thresholds, spirits that lingered at doorways, wells, or bridges, testing those who passed. Some appeared monstrous, with twisted faces and sharp teeth, yet their purpose was not always to harm. They were keepers of boundaries, ensuring that travelers respected the places they entered, that no one crossed without awareness. To pass safely often required an offering, a prayer, or a simple acknowledgement. In this way, the grotesque figure was not only a source of fear but a symbol of protection, a guardian who demanded respect. The presence of these beings in Celtic storytelling reflects a deeper truth, that life itself was seen as a journey through thresholds, from one stage to another, from one world to the next. Just as a household spirit guarded the hearth, and a goblin lurked at the edge of the wood, so too did unseen forces stand at the great thresholds of existence, birth, death, and beyond. To honor the small guardians was, in a way, to prepare for the greater mysteries, to live with humility and reverence before forces far beyond human control. Even in their grotesque shapes, these beings carried lessons. They reminded humans not to be deceived by appearances, not to dismiss the small or the strange. A twisted, ugly goblin might hold wisdom, a mischievous puka might bring unexpected gifts. And above all, they taught that respect was the foundation of peace. To live well with the spirits was to live well with the world, acknowledging that all things, seen and unseen, deserved a place in the grand tapestry of life. As you let these images drift into your mind, imagine the quiet presence of these guardians in the corners of your own world, not as frightening monsters, but as echoes of an older way of seeing, where every shadow carried a story and every silence might hold a whisper. Perhaps a forgotten creak in the floor, a flicker of movement at the edge of vision, could be more than chance. Perhaps it is a reminder of the unseen companions who, grotesque though they may appear, keep watch over thresholds, hearths, and paths. And as you drift further into rest, their presence softens, no longer grotesque, but strangely comforting. They are the keepers of quiet places, the watchers in the night, the little guardians who stand at the edge of dream. In their company, the world feels richer, filled with mystery. And as sleep draws near, you can let go of fear, knowing that the unseen is not only frightening but also protective, a reminder that no one journeys through life entirely alone. In the myths of the Celts, the land itself was alive with memory, and in its valleys and mountains, giants were said to dwell. These were not simply larger versions of men, but beings who embodied the very scale and weight of the earth. Their footsteps left hollows that became lakes, their battles carved ridges into the hills, and their presence explained the grandeur of the landscape. To speak of giants in Celtic tradition is to speak of forces so immense that they seem beyond measure, beings who reflected the ruggedness and vastness of Ireland and Britain themselves. Among these colossal figures were the Fomorians, ancient beings who represented chaos, darkness, and the raw, untamed powers of nature. They were described as misshapen and strange, some with one eye, one arm, and one leg, others with grotesque features that marked them as something beyond human. The Fomorians were not merely monsters but forces of disorder, the the harsh storms, the blight on crops, the sickness that spread without warning. They were a reminder that the natural world was not always gentle or kind, but could turn fierce and destructive, towering over humankind with indifference. Standing against them were the Tuatha De Danann, the shining tribe of gods, who represented skill, craft, and balance. Their battles with the Fomorians were not simply clashes between armies, but symbolic struggles between order and chaos, light and shadow, the known and the unknowable. When the two forces met, the ground shook, and legends say that mountains and rivers were shaped by their collisions. In these stories, giants were not separate from the land, but part of its very making, their bodies and deeds woven into the earth itself. But not all giants were terrifying. Some were remembered as ancestors, figures of strength who built great mounds, lifted impossible stones, and shaped sacred sites. The Firbolg, for example, were said to be an ancient people of Ireland, sometimes imagined as towering in size, who carried heavy sacks of soil to shape the very land. Their name means men of bags, and though not monstrous like the Fomorians, they were still larger than life, remembered as shapers of the landscape and builders of fortifications. In these tales, the line between myth and history blurs, for the Firbolg may reflect memories of earlier tribes who once dwelled in Ireland, their legacy magnified into the stature of giants. Legends of giants often explained landmarks that puzzled ancient people. A massive boulder perched on a hill might be said to have been thrown by a giant in anger. A long stretch of ridges could be described as the path left by a giant dragging his club across the land. Even the famous Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, with its strange basalt columns, gave rise to the tale of Finn McCool, a giant hero who built the causeway to cross the sea and challenge a Scottish giant. In this way, giants were not only figures of fear, but storytellers' answers to the mysteries of the earth, giving human meaning to the vast and strange forms of the natural world. The grotesque forms of the Fomorians contrast with the more noble or human-like giants of other tales. Some were said to have monstrous heads with gaping mouths, others skin as dark as night or as rough as stone. Balor of the Evil Eye, whom we met earlier, was one of their greatest leaders, his single, destructive eye burning through ranks of warriors. Yet even Balor was a reflection of the overwhelming powers of storm and disaster, a giant who embodied the terror of forces beyond human control. To the Celts, these grotesque shapes were not simply frightening, but symbolic, giving form to the destructive potential of nature and the fragility of human life before it. And yet, in the figure of giants, there is always awe. Imagine standing before a mountain, its slopes disappearing into mist, its weight pressing against the sky. In such a moment, one feels small, humbled, yet also strangely connected to something vast. Giants embodied that feeling, giving the incomprehensible presence of the earth a living form. They were the personification of mountains and storms, rivers and stones, the raw immensity of existence standing beside fragile humanity. The tales of giants also carried lessons about hubris and humility. To challenge a giant was to challenge the earth itself, a test of strength and courage, but also of wisdom. Many stories tell of mortals who tried to trick or outwit giants rather than overpower them, for sheer force was rarely enough. These stories whispered that wisdom was greater than strength, that cunning could balance what size and power could not. In this way, giants served as both threats and teachers, their enormity forcing humans to find other paths to survival. Even now, when you walk through the landscapes of Ireland or Scotland, the old stories linger. The stones seem heavy with memory, the hills echo with the weight of footsteps long gone. To the ancient Celts, these places were not silent. They were shaped by the movements of giants, guardians and destroyers, beings whose echoes still ripple through the earth. To lie down beneath the stars, in a valley carved by unseen hands, was to rest within the palm of giants, to feel their presence in the silence of the night. Picture it now, a dark hill rising under the moonlight, its slopes silvered with mist. At its crest stands a figure, immense and still, its shape merging with the land until it is difficult to tell where rock ends and flesh begins. The wind sweeps around it, carrying the sound of distant waves, and for a moment, it seems the giant shifts, watching with eyes that glow faintly in the dark. Then, as the night deepens, the figure is gone, leaving only the hill, ancient and unmoving. Yet in the heart, the impression remains that giants still linger, unseen but never absent, woven into the earth itself. As the story of giants fades into the quiet of night, it leaves behind both fear and comfort. Fear, in the sense of awe before forces too great to master. Comfort, in the sense that these forces are eternal, part of the same earth that cradles us. Giants remind us of our smallness, but also of our belonging. That we, too, are part of the land, though on a smaller scale. And as sleep draws near, their immense shadows soften into dream, guardians of hills and stones who keep silent watch as the world drifts deeper into night. If the giants belonged to the mountains and the hard earth, then the spirits of the Celts flowed with the rivers, lingered in the mists, and slept beneath the waters of deep lakes. Water was not simply a resource to ancient peoples. It was a mystery, a mirror, a shifting veil between this world and the other. To drink from a spring, to wash in a stream, or to cross a river was to brush against powers older and stranger than humankind. For the Celts, lakes, rivers, and wells were sacred places, and within them dwelled spirits both beautiful and frightening, guardians of secrets and bringers of fate. Many stories speak of the banshee, the washerwoman at the ford. She was a spirit who appeared near rivers and streams, bent over the water, washing blood-stained clothes or armor. To those who saw her, the sight was chilling, for the garments she washed belonged to those fated to die in battle. The banshee was not a monster who caused death, but a herald who revealed it, her presence a sign that fate was near. She was sometimes described as small and hunched, with long hair and a mournful cry, yet she was also strangely tender, performing her duty with quiet certainty. To encounter her was to see one's mortality reflected in water's rippling surface. Other water spirits took gentler forms. Many tales tell of women who rose from lakes, radiant and otherworldly, to marry mortal men. These beings were often kind and generous, blessing their husbands with prosperity, teaching them wisdom, or bearing children who became heroes. Yet such unions were fragile, bound by conditions. If the mortal broke a promise, struck the fairy wife, mocked her, or spoke her secret name, she would vanish, returning to the waters, never to be seen again. These stories reflected the delicate relationship between humans and the otherworld, one of beauty, generosity, but also strict boundaries. To treat the mysterious with disrespect was to lose it forever. Rivers themselves were often seen as living beings, powerful and divine. The river Boyne, for example, was named for the goddess Bone, who was said to have defied the wisdom of a sacred well. Approaching its waters, she set loose their force, which swept across the land to form the great river. In this tale, water is both knowledge and danger, a source of life and a force that cannot be contained. To live beside a river was to live beside a deity, and every crossing was an act of reverence. Mist, too, carried its own spirits. The Celts believed that fog was more than weather. It was the breath of the otherworld, a veil that rolled across fields and waters to conceal or reveal as it wished. Travelers caught in mist might find themselves wandering in circles, never reaching their destination, as if the spirits were toying with them. Some said the mist could open pathways into the otherworld, carrying mortals away into strange lands of beauty or terror. To step into fog was to step into mystery, unsure whether one would return unchanged. Water spirits were not always kind. Some were dangerous, pulling mortals beneath the surface, luring them with beauty or trickery. Dark horses were said to rise from lakes, enticing riders to mount them before plunging into the depths. In other stories, children who lingered too close to the water's edge might be dragged under by unseen hands. These tales carried warnings as much as wonder, teaching respect for the power of rivers and lakes, reminding people of how quickly water could shift from life-giving to life-taking. Yet even in their danger, water spirits carried a certain calm. The rhythm of rivers, the stillness of lakes, the endless whisper of streams. These were sounds that lulled as much as they warned. To sit beside a body of water was to listen to something ancient, something that had flowed long before and would continue long after. The spirits who dwelled there were embodiments of that eternity, guardians of cycles beyond human time. Imagine standing at the edge of a quiet lake under the moonlight. The surface is still, a mirror reflecting stars, broken only by the ripple of a breeze. Mist curls above the water, soft and silver, hiding shapes that move slowly beneath. At first, it is only shadow, but then, perhaps, a figure rises, a woman, her hair long and pale, her dress flowing as though woven from the water itself. She gazes with eyes that hold both kindness and sorrow, and for a moment, the air feels heavy with possibility. Is she here to bless, to warn, or to carry someone away? The water gives no answer. The ripples fade, and the lake returns to silence. These images carried meaning for the Celts, for water was the source of both life and transformation. Wells were places of healing, where offerings were made to spirits for health and protection. Springs were seen as gateways, where one might glimpse or even enter the other world. Lakes were not just deep hollows but thresholds, places where the living and the unseen touched. By telling stories of water spirits, people gave voice to their reverence, their fear, and their hope, wrapping the mystery of water in forms they could see and imagine. To this day, water carries that same mystery. Standing beside a river, we feel its movement not only as sound, but as time itself, flowing endlessly forward. Looking into a lake, we sense the depths, dark and secret, holding what we cannot see. When mist rolls across a field or drifts low over water, it still brings silence, a soft strangeness, as though the world has shifted into a dream. The Celtic spirits of water and mist linger in these feelings, even if their names have faded, reminding us of the awe our ancestors felt before these quiet powers. And as the story of water settles into the stillness of night, it carries with it a sense of calm. For though some water spirits were frightening and some were sorrowful, all of them embodied the eternal. Water flows, mist drifts, lakes rest in silence, and their spirits remain as guardians of mystery. To close your eyes now is to hear the soft trickle of a stream, to feel the cool breath of mist on the skin, to drift as though floating in calm waters. These ancient presences ask for nothing more than respect, and in return, they offer rest, peace, and the gentle embrace of the unknown. If the waters held spirits of depth and silence, then the forests of the Celtic world were the dwelling places of beings both hidden and watchful. To step into the woods was to step into another realm, one where shadows moved differently, where silence had its own language, and where unseen eyes seemed to follow every step. For the Celts, forests were sacred, vast cathedrals of oak, ash, and yew, filled with spirits who guarded their trees, their animals, and their secrets. To wander too carelessly into the woodland was to risk meeting not only wild beasts, but stranger beings who blurred the line between human, spirit, and monster. Among the forest dwellers were the Sidhi, the fairy folk, who lived beneath mounds and hills, but also roamed through groves and thickets. They were not the small winged creatures of later tales, but tall, beautiful, and formidable beings, radiant and unsettling in equal measure. At times, they appeared to travelers, leading them off the paths into glittering halls hidden beneath ancient trees. Those who followed might find themselves feasting in wonder for what seemed a single night, only to wake and discover that years had passed. The forests were their doorways, thresholds into worlds where time flowed differently, and mortals who lingered too long risked never returning the same. There were darker beings too, spirits who tested or tormented those who strayed too deep. Some were said to appear as hunters, their hounds glowing like fire, chasing mortals through the undergrowth until dawn. Others took the form of shadowy figures, half glimpsed between trunks, who whispered names and voices that sounded almost familiar. These were not always malevolent, but they carried danger in their presence, for they belonged to a realm beyond reason, where mortals had little power. The groves themselves were living sanctuaries, places where druids sought wisdom and performed rites. The oak, the ash, and the yew were seen as sacred trees, their roots reaching into the other world, their branches stretching toward the heavens. To sit beneath such a tree was to sit at a crossroads of existence, where spirits could pass between realms. It was believed that guardians watched over these groves, spirits of the trees themselves, towering and old, their forms sometimes glimpsed in the shifting bark or in the swaying of branches. These guardians were not grotesque, but awe-inspiring, embodiments of patience, silence, and timeless endurance. Imagine walking into such a forest at twilight. The air is cool and damp, carrying the scent of moss and earth. Shafts of fading light filter through the canopy, painting the path in silver and shadow. Every sound, the crack of a twig, the rustle of leaves, feels amplified, as though the forest listens as intently as it speaks. Ahead, between two ancient oaks, a darker shadow moves, pausing just long enough for the breath to catch. It may be nothing more than the play of light, or it may be one of the hidden dwellers, watching, waiting, deciding whether to reveal itself. In such moments, the forest seems alive, every tree a presence, every silence a voice. There were also animal spirits tied to the woods, stag figures that appeared with antlers glowing, guiding or warning travelers, wolves that moved silently beside hunters, guardians as much as threats, and birds whose cries carried messages from the unseen. These creatures were not merely animals, but messengers, embodying the spirit of the woodland itself. To meet such a being was to receive a sign, whether of fortune, danger, or transformation. The forests were full of thresholds, and the creatures within them were guides who could either help one cross or bar the way entirely. The Celts told many cautionary tales of mortals who mocked or disrespected the woodland spirits. A man who cut down a sacred tree without asking might find his tools broken, his luck ruined, or his sleep plagued with visions. A woman who laughed at a strange figure in the undergrowth might later be led astray, unable to find her way home. These stories carried the same lesson: respect. The forest was alive, not a mere resource but a realm of its own, inhabited by beings who demanded reverence. To ignore this truth was to invite misfortune. To honor it was to walk in safety. Even now, forests carry that same weight. When mist drifts between trees and silence deepens, it is easy to feel that something else is present, watching from the edge of vision. The Celtic tales remind us that this sensation is not just imagination but memory, the lingering awareness of ancestors who saw the woods as sacred and full of life. To walk among trees is to walk among guardians, to step softly in the presence of old powers. As you let these stories drift through your mind, imagine lying in a woodland clearing beneath the stars. The trees stand tall around you, their branches swaying gently, their roots deep in the soil. The air is still, save for the soft movement of leaves, and from somewhere far off, an owl calls. The shadows are not frightening now but protective, wrapping the world in calm. The dwellers of the wood, once terrifying in tale, become gentle in the night, guardians of dreams as much as of groves. And as sleep deepens, their whispers become nothing more than the rustle of leaves, carrying you into rest, safe in the embrace of the shadowed woodland. When the forests fell silent and the rivers rested beneath the stars, the Celts looked upward and listened to the night sky. It was not empty but alive with wings, shadows, and cries that pierced the dark. Birds and creatures of the night were more than simple animals to them. They were omens, messengers, and spirits who carried meaning across the veil. Their flight, their calls, and their sudden appearances shaped the beliefs of those who lived close to the land, turning the night sky into a realm of mystery filled with both warning and wonder. The owl was perhaps the most haunting of these beings. Its great eyes seemed to see into darkness itself, its silent flight gliding like a shadow over fields and villages. In Celtic lore, the owl was often a bird of the underworld, a guide for souls, and a herald of death. To hear its cry in the night was to sense that change was near, that someone's life was drawing to a close. Yet the owl was not only feared, it was also respected as a creature of wisdom, able to see what others could not, a companion of hidden knowledge. Its presence carried both dread and reverence, a reminder that even in endings, there is understanding to be found. Bats, too, filled the night skies, their small bodies darting swiftly, their wings whispering like soft cloth. To the Celts, bats were associated with liminality, the in-between state, for they were neither bird nor beast, creatures of twilight who slipped between worlds. Their sudden appearances were unsettling, as though they had emerged from shadows themselves. Some tales spoke of bats as messengers of the other world, fluttering from unseen realms to deliver signs. Others saw them as protectors, consuming insects in the night and keeping balance in the dark. But always, their strange movements marked them as creatures not entirely of this world, dancing at the edges of vision like fragments of dream. Then there were the phantom birds, those that appeared not in flesh but in story, omens that haunted the Celtic imagination. The most famous of these was the raven, a bird both feared and honored. We have already seen how the Morrigan often took its form, circling above battles, her black wings beating as death drew near. Ravens were scavengers, yes, but in that role they became symbols of transformation, turning death into sustenance, carrying the fallen back into the cycle of life. To see a raven was to be reminded of mortality, but also of continuity, of the endless turning of the wheel of existence. Crows, like their kin, carried a similar weight. Their calls were harsh, echoing across empty fields, unsettling those who heard them. Yet crows were clever, resourceful, survivors who thrived where others faltered. In this way, they were both ominous and admirable, embodying the duality of survival in a harsh world. To the Celts, their presence was a message that endings come, but so too does endurance, that wisdom often wears dark feathers and carries a rough voice. The cry of a bird at night was never taken lightly. An unexpected call outside the window, a sudden flutter of wings in darkness. These were signs, and people listened. Sometimes the cries foretold death, other times they spoke of change, or simply reminded mortals that they were never alone in the world. The night sky was not silent, and its voices carried meaning. To ignore them was to risk walking blindly through fate. To heed them was to walk in rhythm with the unseen. Imagine now the stillness of a Celtic night. The stars are veiled by drifting clouds, and the moon shines softly through their breaks. The air is cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant smoke. Then, across the silence, a sound rises, the low, mournful call of an owl. It echoes once, then again, and in the pause that follows, the night feels deeper, heavier, as though time itself has shifted. Somewhere unseen, wings beat softly, and a dark shape glides across the sky. To those who lived in such times, this was no ordinary moment. It was a message, a reminder that the veil was thin, that spirits moved close in the shadowed hours. The Celts did not always fear these creatures. They also wove them into stories of guidance and guardianship. Birds could serve as companions to heroes, flying ahead to show the path or warning them of danger. Owls, with their sharp vision, were believed to see truth even in the darkest places, making them symbols of hidden wisdom. Ravens, though feared, were seen as protectors in some stories, their presence assuring that the dead were not forgotten. Even bats, with their strange ways, became emblems of transition, carrying the lesson that life is full of thresholds and transformations. In the broader Celtic worldview, the night sky was a mirror of the other world. The stars, the moon, the drifting of clouds, all of it formed a canvas where spirits moved. Birds and creatures of the night were the brushstrokes across that canvas, fleeting signs that something greater stirred beyond mortal sight. To hear them, to see them, was to glimpse the pattern of fate itself, if only for a moment. As these images settle in your mind, let the night sky itself become part of your rest. Picture owls drifting silently, their wings gliding with effortless grace. Imagine bats darting swiftly, weaving patterns invisible yet intricate in the dark. See ravens and crows perched on branches, their eyes gleaming like black jewels, watching not with malice but with ancient understanding. In their presence, the night is no longer empty but full of guardians, messengers, and companions who remind us that even in darkness, there is meaning. And as you sink deeper into stillness, their cries and whispers fade into the background of dream. The owl's mournful call becomes a lullaby, the flutter of bat wings a gentle rhythm, the raven's shadow a cloak of protection. The night sky, once filled with fear and omen, becomes a sanctuary, where the creatures of darkness keep watch while you rest. They are not only harbingers of fate, but keepers of the night, ensuring that in the hours of silence, no soul drifts entirely alone. As twilight deepened over the Celtic lands, the world seemed to blur. The sharp lines of daylight softened, colors faded into shadow, and the familiar shapes of fields, rivers, and hills transformed. In this liminal light, the Celts believed, the boundary between realms grew thin, and it was in such moments that the shape-shifters and phantom beasts appeared. They were creatures of uncertainty, embodiments of change, reminding mortals that identity was never fixed and that appearances could deceive as easily as they could protect. Shape-shifting was a theme woven throughout Celtic mythology, and it was not always monstrous. Gods, spirits, and heroes alike were known to transform into animals, taking on the form of wolves, stags, birds, or fish. To change shape was to embrace a deeper truth, to reveal another side of one's nature, or to conceal power behind a mask. Yet when these transformations came unbidden, or when they were encountered by mortals without understanding, they inspired awe, fear, and stories whispered around firesides. One of the most haunting figures of Celtic lore was the werewolf, though not in the form we know today from later tales. Celtic werewolves were often guardians of the land or cursed beings who prowled the night in wolfish guise. They were not mindless predators, but intelligent, sorrowful, and bound by enchantment. To meet one on a twilight path was to confront both danger and mystery, for one never knew whether the creature might bare its teeth in attack or guide the travelers safely through the dark. Stags, too, were powerful figures of transformation. A man might appear at dusk with human features, only for his form to shimmer into that of a great stag with antlers like branches, glowing faintly in the twilight. Such beings were liminal guardians, protectors of the forest and the threshold between this world and the other. The stag was noble, elusive, and deeply tied to the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. To follow a phantom stag through the trees was to risk being drawn into the otherworld, never to return. There were also tales of phantom hounds, vast and spectral, their eyes glowing like embers as they padded silently across the twilight fields. These hounds were not always harmful, but their presence carried weight, a reminder of the wild hunt or the approach of spirits from beyond. Some said they escorted the dead, guiding souls to their resting places. Others believed they appeared as omens, heralding storms or war. Their shapes were often vague in the fading light, sometimes black, sometimes white, always unsettling in their silence. The Morrigan herself, goddess of fate and battle, was known for her shape-shifting. She could appear as a crow circling above warriors, as a woman at a river's edge, or as a beast who tested the courage of heroes. In these forms, she embodied the twilight itself, the uncertainty, the shifting of light into shadow, the knowledge that change was inevitable. To see her was to be reminded that nothing stays the same, that life itself is a series of transformations, and that fate, like twilight, cannot be held back. In Celtic twilight tales, there were also phantom beasts that defied clear description. Travelers spoke of creatures half-seen at the edges of vision, beasts larger than horses with glowing eyes and shifting forms. Some appeared as cats the size of wolves, their fur bristling, their gaze cold and unblinking. Others seemed to be made of mist, dissolving as one drew closer, only to reappear farther down the path. These phantom beasts were not always given names or stories. They were presences, experiences, reminders that the world was more than it seemed. Twilight was a dangerous time to wander. As the day faded, the certainty of light gave way to doubt. A traveler might think he saw a friend ahead on the path, only for the figure to shift into something else entirely. A herd of deer grazing peacefully might, in the blink of an eye, vanish like smoke. Horses tied by the roadside could reveal themselves as phantom steeds, luring riders into the mist. The Celts believed these encounters were not coincidences, but moments when the veil grew thin, when the otherworld reached across and showed itself in fleeting, unsettling glimpses. Yet not all of these beings were foes. Some were guides. A phantom hound could lead a lost traveler home, its glowing eyes lighting the way. A stag appearing at the edge of a clearing might guide a hunter toward sustenance or away from danger. Even the werewolf-like guardians, cursed though they were, could act as protectors of the land, watching over sacred groves or burial mounds. In this way, the twilight was not only fearful but also rich with possibility, a space where help and harm were equally likely, and where mortals had to walk carefully, mindful of the shifting shapes around them. Picture now the Celtic twilight, the last glow of suns sinking below the horizon, the sky painted in shades of violet and gold, the earth cooling with the promise of night. Shadows stretch long across the fields, blurring edges, turning bushes into crouching beasts, rocks into looming figures. You walk softly, the air hushed, the birds gone silent. Ahead, between the dimming light and the growing dark, a form moves, too tall to be a man, too graceful to be a beast. It lingers, waiting, its eyes catching the faintest glimmer of light. You blink, and it is gone, or perhaps it was never there at all. In that moment, you understand the essence of the shapeshifter. It is not only about creatures who change their forms, but about the uncertainty that twilight itself creates. The world shifts, appearances deceive, and the mind fills the gaps with stories. For the Celts, these moments were reminders that nothing was fixed, that transformation was part of life, that to live was to accept the ever-changing nature of the world. And so, as the twilight deepens into night, let the shapeshifters and phantom beasts drift softly into your thoughts. They are no longer frightening but comforting, symbols of change and transition. Like dreams, they move fluidly, shifting from one form to another, guiding you gently into the spaces between waking and sleeping. They are the guardians of twilight, watching as the world shifts, and as your own mind begins its journey into the quiet transformations of rest. As our journey through the myths and monsters of the Celtic world draws to a close, it is worth pausing in the quiet and considering what these tales have given us. They are more than frightening stories whispered on stormy nights or warnings passed down through generations. They are mirrors of human experience, reflections of fears, hopes, and the mysteries that once surrounded daily life. For the Celts, monsters were never simply villains to be defeated. They were teachers, guardians, and symbols of forces greater than ourselves. Each creature we have visited carries meaning that goes beyond its terrifying form. The water spirits of lakes and rivers reminded mortals to respect the depths and to be cautious near waters that could both sustain and destroy. The beings of the forest embodied the silence and mystery of the groves, teaching reverence for places where the natural world felt most alive. The night birds and phantom hounds whispered of mortality and fate, of messages carried across the veil. The shapeshifters of twilight reminded people that life itself is constant change, a series of transformations as fluid as the fading of day into night. In their own way, these beings helped the Celts navigate a world that was unpredictable and often harsh. Life in ancient times was full of uncertainty. Storms could destroy crops, sickness could appear without warning, enemies might strike when least expected. Monsters gave shape to these uncertainties, turning them into stories that could be shared, remembered, and understood. Fear became narrative, and narrative became wisdom. To tell a tale of a banshee was not simply to frighten. It was to express the truth that loss is part of life. To speak of phantom hounds was to remind listeners of the nearness of the spirit world, the thinness of the boundary between what we see and what we cannot. Even now, long after the Celts have gone, their monsters remain with us. We may not walk through misty glens with the same sense of dread, but the stories endure, carried in folklore, literature, and the echoes of our own imagination. They live on because they speak to something timeless, the human need to explain what cannot be explained, to give shape to the unknown, and to find comfort in patterns even within chaos. The monsters remind us that fear itself can be softened when given a face, a name, and a story. And there is something else they give us, something gentler. For in the telling of these stories, we find rhythm, calm, and connection. As the words flow like water, as the images of forests, rivers, and twilight take form in the mind, the monsters lose their sharpness. They transform into companions of the imagination, guides who walk beside us as we drift towards sleep. The banshee's cry, once chilling, becomes a soft echo fading into distance. The owl's call, once ominous, becomes a lullaby in the dark. The phantom hound becomes a silent guardian, pacing at the edge of the dream, watching over without threat. To close your eyes now is to step into the same twilight the Celts once knew. You carry with you the memories of these beings, but they are no longer frightening. They are part of a story, woven gently into the fabric of rest. Their presence in memory serves a purpose, not to disturb, but to remind you that fear and wonder are siblings, and that even the most terrifying monsters can, in the end, become keepers of peace when seen through the lens of story. So let your thoughts drift back through the places we have walked together, the rivers and lakes where spirits stirred, the forests where shadows whispered, the skies alive with wings, the twilight fields where forms shifted and vanished. Each scene lingers softly, like a painting slowly fading in the mind. The monsters do not leave entirely, for stories never truly end, but they take their place as quiet companions, their voices hushed, their presence softened. They walk with you only as far as the threshold of sleep, and there, they remain behind, standing guard as you step into your own dreaming world. As sleep begins to draw near, allow these closing reflections to settle like mist upon the landscape of your thoughts. The Celts knew that stories were as essential as bread and fire, that they nourished the spirit and gave warmth against the unknown. Tonight, these stories serve the same purpose. They remind you that the world is vast, mysterious, and full of wonder, and that even in its darkest corners, there is beauty to be found. And so, the monsters of Celtic mythology, once terrifying, now become something else entirely. They become gentle echoes, whispers of an older world, guardians of the boundary between waking and dreaming. They are the voices that lull you, the images that drift through your mind like clouds across the moon. Their power is not to frighten, but to carry you, slowly and softly, into the deep and healing quiet of rest. And now, dear listener, we reach the final moments of our journey through the monsters and mysteries of Celtic mythology. The tales have been told, the shadows have shifted, and the night has carried us far from the waking world into the quiet embrace of story. It is here, at the edge of endings and beginnings, that we slow our steps and prepare to rest. The Celts believed in cycles, life and death, light and dark, waking and dreaming. Just as the sun sets and rises, so too do stories close and open again. Tonight, you have traveled through rivers haunted by spirits, forests guarded by unseen dwellers, skies filled with wings, and twilight paths where shapes blurred and vanished. You have met beings who once terrified mortals, yet who now linger only as whispers, their sharpness softened into calm. Each tale has been a thread, woven into a tapestry that now rests gently before you, complete, but never truly finished. For stories, like dreams, never end. They only wait for us to return. As you lie now in the quiet of your own space, let the rhythm of these words slow your thoughts. Feel the weight of the day loosening, the pace of your breath easing. You are no longer in a world of tasks and worries. You are in the company of ancient voices, carried gently across time. Their stories are no longer frightening but comforting, like a fire glowing low, its embers warm against the cool night air. The banshee's cry fades into silence, leaving only the soft sigh of wind through distant hills. The phantom hounds curl into stillness, watchful but at peace, guardians who keep to the edge of vision without stepping closer. The owls, the ravens, the creatures of the night sky, settle into their branches, their wings folded, their calls quieted. Even the shape-shifters of twilight, restless in their transformations, pause now, resting in forms of calm. The whole Celtic world, once alive with movement and voices, lies hushed in a gentle stillness, as though the stories themselves are drifting into slumber alongside you. You may picture yourself lying in a meadow beneath the stars, the earth cool and steady beneath you. Around you, the silhouettes of hills rise and fall, and beyond them, forests stand in dark silence. The river glimmers faintly, catching the last touch of moonlight, while a soft mist curls along its edges. Above, the night sky stretches endlessly, the stars glowing like quiet guardians. The monsters are nowhere to be seen now, not because they have vanished, but because they have taken their places as part of the land itself. They have become the hush of the forest, the shimmer of the water, the whisper of the wind. They are no longer separate or strange. They are woven into the calmness that surrounds you. Take a slow breath, feeling the rise and fall, the way air moves easily, quietly. Each breath draws you deeper into stillness, carrying you further from the noise of waking life. The stories we have told rest now within you, safe, gentle, like old friends waiting patiently at the edges of thought. They do not demand attention. They simply linger, keeping you company as you slip into the realm of dreams. If your mind wanders, let it drift with ease. Perhaps it follows a phantom stag into the mist, its antlers glowing faintly as it disappears into trees. Perhaps it soars with the wings of a raven across fields bathed in moonlight. Perhaps it walks quietly along the banks of a river where spirits watch, their presence calm and kind. Wherever it drifts, trust that it carries you safely, for these are no longer tales of fear, but of gentle guidance. They will not startle you awake. They will carry you softly, step by step, into deeper rest. The Celts knew that dreams were another kind of world, one that mirrored the waking life but spoke in symbols, riddles, and whispers. As you enter that world, you bring with you the calm of the stories we have shared. The monsters stand at the threshold, not to block you, but to guard you, ensuring your passage is gentle. Their presence, once feared, now becomes protection, a circle around your rest. They hold the edges of the dream, keeping you safe within its quiet center. Let go now of whatever lingers from the day. Set down the weight of thought, the burden of memory, the noise of worry. You do not need them here. The night asks nothing of you but rest. The stories have been told, the paths have been walked, and now, it is enough simply to be still. Sleep does not need to be chased. It comes naturally, like twilight fading into night, like a river flowing into the sea. Trust it, allow it, and it will arrive. As you listen to the final words of this tale, let your body grow heavier, sinking into comfort. Feel the softness beneath you, the steadiness supporting you, the warmth wrapping around you. Your breath moves slowly, evenly, like the tide, in and out, calm and unhurried. With each exhale, the world grows quieter, until only silence remains. The Celts once believed that in sleep, the soul wandered the other world, learning, resting, returning with wisdom. Whether you believe this or not, know that in your rest tonight, you are safe, carried by the same rhythms that have soothed countless generations. The monsters of myth have softened into guardians, the stories into lullabies, the night into sanctuary. And so, as we close this journey, I leave you here, in stillness and calm. The world beyond can wait. For now, there is only peace, only rest, only the gentle embrace of night. May your dreams be soft, your sleep deep, and your spirit renewed. The monsters of Celtic mythology keep their watch, but not with fear. They keep it with care, ensuring that nothing disturbs the quiet you deserve. Good night, traveler. Sleep well, and dream deeply. And so, with the last threads of story woven and the final echoes fading into silence, we arrive at the end of our long wandering through Celtic nightscapes. Yet even endings, as the Celts understood, are never truly final. They are pauses, gentle rests in the endless rhythm of beginnings and closings, breaths in the larger song of time. Tonight's stories may fall quiet, but they linger, like the glow of embers after fire, like the faint shimmer of stars that remain even when dawn begins to rise. The monsters we have met, strange, shadowed, and powerful, have walked beside us through water, forest, sky, and twilight. At first, they may have seemed unsettling, their cries sharp, their forms unfamiliar, their presence heavy. But as the stories unfolded, they softened, revealing not only their terrors but their lessons, their wisdom, their place in the great tapestry of the Celtic world. They are no longer distant figures of dread. They have become companions, guardians, and reminders of the deep connection between humans and the mysteries around them. Think again of the rivers and lakes, where beings like the kelpie or the selkie stirred beneath the ripples. They remind us of the dual nature of water, its ability to give life and to take it away, to soothe and to overwhelm. When we hear the sound of waves or the gentle flow of a stream, those old stories return in memory, not as fears, but as quiet voices urging respect and reverence. The waters carry us, nourish us, and reflect the same mysteries that once inspired awe in the Celts. Remember, too, the forests, vast and watchful, where shadowed figures seem to linger between the trees. Those stories remind us that the woods are alive, not empty spaces, but sacred sanctuaries where time slows and silence speaks. Even today, when we step into a grove or walk beneath the branches of an ancient oak, a part of us feels the same stillness, the same awareness that others have felt for thousands of years. The stories preserve that sense, encouraging us to listen closely to the quiet and to tread with respect. Look upward once more, in memory, to the night skies filled with wings, the owls calling softly, the bats fluttering unseen, the ravens and crows circling with messages of change. These creatures, once ominous, now become companions of the imagination, reminding us that the world above us is never empty, that every sound in the darkness has meaning, and that even in the quietest nights, life moves around us in unseen forms. And finally, recall the twilight, that in-between place where shapes shift, where beasts and figures blur into uncertainty. Twilight is the reminder that nothing stays the same, that transformation is constant, and that beauty often lies in mystery. The Celtic tales of shapeshifters and phantom beasts mirror our own lives, which change, shift, and transform in ways both subtle and profound. Just as twilight blends day into night, so too do these stories blend fear into comfort, giving us a safe space to explore uncertainty. What begins as terror becomes wisdom. What begins as a monster becomes a guardian. What begins as a story becomes a gentle guide into sleep. As we close, allow yourself to drift further into stillness. The monsters no longer speak. They have returned to their hills, their rivers, their skies, and their twilight paths. They remain there, part of the land, part of the myth, waiting quietly for the next time their tales are called upon. But they do not follow you now. Instead, they stand as sentinels at the edge of your dream, holding the boundaries, ensuring you pass into rest without disturbance. The Celts believed that in telling stories, one kept the world alive, kept the unseen near, and kept memory strong. Tonight, you have joined in that ancient rhythm, keeping the stories breathing by listening, by imagining, by carrying them into the silence of your own rest. They are safe with you now, and you are safe with them. The monsters do not harm, they comfort. They do not frighten, they soothe. They do not demand, they accompany. So breathe slowly, in and out. Feel your body heavier, softer, supported. Let the words fade into the background like waves against a distant shore. You are no longer listening with effort. You are drifting, floating, carried by something larger and quieter than thought. The stories become a lull, a hum, a presence without weight. The night wraps around you, and all that remains is calm. Perhaps, in dreams, you will return to these places. You may walk again along the riverbank where mist curls low, or sit in the heart of a forest where branches weave overhead. You may hear the wings of an owl, the cry of a raven, or the soft padding of hounds across twilight fields. But in dreams, they will not startle you. They will guide you, watch you, and keep you company as you wander in safety. Dreams, like stories, turn fear into symbols, and symbols into wisdom. And when morning comes, as it always does, the stories will rest quietly, waiting for night to return. You may not remember every detail, but you will carry their calm, their rhythm, their gentle presence. The Celts believed memory was a living thing, passed from tongue to tongue, from heart to heart. Tonight, that memory has passed into you, and it will remain, a quiet ember glowing long after the tale is done. Now, let your breath slow even more. Let your thoughts loosen their hold. There is nothing more you need to do, nowhere else you need to be. The world beyond the story can wait until dawn. For now, you are held in stillness, surrounded by the quiet guardians of story and dream. Rest well, traveler of myths. May your night be deep, your dreams gentle, and your spirit at peace. The monsters of Celtic mythology will remain here, at the edges, waiting not to frighten, but to welcome you back whenever you wish to wander again. Until then, let them fade into silence, let the night cradle you, and let sleep carry you far and softly away. Good night.